Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Tuesday, September 24th, 2019. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Brian Rosenwald on Talk Radio's America. How an industry took over a political party that took over the United States. Also on the program today, creeping towards impeachment as Trump's Ukrainian fishing expedition unravels. Meanwhile, in the wake of a botched peace plan, U.S. airstrikes now killed 40 civilians in Afghanistan. Trump cronies refused to warn the New York Times reporter of an imminent arrest in Egypt. And a decision pending on Trump's attempt to quash New York City subpoenas for his taxes. Meanwhile, Bernie drops a wealth tax that outpaces Warren's, as well as dropping a medical debt payoff plan.
Get it.
Meanwhile, Biden turns to third way to sink healthcare. Boris Johnson gets bonked by a British Supreme Court. Parliament no longer suspended.
It's an official term. It's called bonked. It's bonking. No.
It sort of felt like it would be.
Like, Boris Johnson has been bonked.
Gantz and Netanyahu may have a deal on an Israeli government.
That's great. A war criminal and a war criminal.
We'll see. All this and more on today's program, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us. We have full complement in the studio today. And things are moving rather quickly, or they appear to be, at least in terms of public and congressional sentiment regarding impeachment. This is something, as you know, I've been hammering away at for some time, and it feels like between the Corey Lewandowski testimony and then this report, I guess it was now about a little more than a week ago when Adam Schiff was on Meet the Press on Sunday, a week ago Sunday, saying that there was a whistleblower complaint that the Director of National Intelligence refused to hand over. Well, that guy, it's John McGuire. Toby Maguire is the actor, correct? John McGuire is the acting DNI. He will be testifying in front of a House Intelligence Committee publicly on Thursday. He will be meeting with the Senate Intelligence Committee behind closed doors, is my understanding. It's unclear who the whistleblower is. The Trump administration yesterday floated the idea of, well, we'll put out the transcript of the phone call, but not the whistleblower complaint, which leads me to believe that the whistleblower complaint is probably, I mean, they could be lying about putting out the transcript of the phone call, but it leads me to believe that the whistleblower complaint is a little bit more comprehensive than just a secondhand version of a phone call. In the meantime, over the past, 36 hours, more and more details have come out, and it's quite clear that Donald Trump tried to blackmail Ukraine into finding something that he could use against Joe Biden in an election, and used the money that the Congress had appropriated for support to Ukraine as what he was blackmailing with. You're just not going to get the money.
I make deals.
There you go.
Tremendous deals.
And the pieces of this, first of all, I mean, I wouldn't put Rudy Giuliani out there, but here is Rudy Giuliani claiming that, well, now remember, there were stories months ago about Rudy Giuliani heading to Ukraine to dig up this stuff. Now, it's one thing for political operatives to be sent to go dig up dirt on another candidate. I mean, it's a little bit unseemly to do it when you're the president and to sort of like send your personal emissary, because it implies that maybe you're using your influence and leaning on them. But now the implication is gone. It all seems to be very, very explicit. So here is Rudy Giuliani, and what they're all trying to do is they know at one point these facts may come out. So what they're trying to do is backfill an explanation for them. And so they're trying to describe what they feel will ultimately come out, but they're going to pre-interpret it. I mean, it's not terribly different than what Bill Barr did with the Mueller report. You can't see it. I'm going to tell you what it says. So by the time this is released, we all know the story. It's an old story, but wait a second. It slightly doesn't say exactly what you had said that first time. But here is Rudy Giuliani still saying something that is rather incredible. He's not addressing his trips to the Ukraine. He's just claiming that he'd been enlisted with just one phone call, because apparently the State Department, they don't have anybody who has any relationship with Ukraine at all. And so Rudy Giuliani's the only person, and maybe they knew that he was being sent there by the president. So they figured, well, we don't have a phone number for anybody.
He speaks Ukrainese.
And so here is Giuliani telling this story on Hannity, because remember now, the danger for either candidate, whoever the Democratic candidate is, they're going to have the same danger. The danger for both these candidates when they run for president is going to be whose base is going to be depressed in terms of turnout. Like, who's not going to be fully maximized? And so it all becomes, how can we maintain that we are above the fray in some fashion?
Did our State Department ask you to go on a mission for them?
They did. I was called
you were
by
a good citizen and you went.
The State Department called me and said...
Pause it. Now, I got to say, that was very adept of Hannity to know to ask that question. Because I would have never thought to ask that question. Even like, did the State Department ask you about this?
It was a State Department mission for our security against Ukraine being ripped off and Joe Biden.
Who here... who's my biggest lapdog? Pompeo? Okay. Then it was the State Department that sent him. Go.
Did our State Department ask you to go on a mission for them?
They did. I was called by the State Department
and you went.
The State Department called me and said, would I take a call from Mr. Yermak, who's number 2 or 3 to the president-elect, now the president. I was put together with Mr. Yermak. I talked to him. He gave me enormously important facts. I conveyed them all to the State Department. Unlike the media lies, fake news, I wasn't...
Pause it. So let me just see if I understand what the deal is. The State Department says, hey, will you take a call? Not will you initiate a call, but they're going to call you and give you facts and then relate them to us. And the reason why we want you is because you are so familiar with what's going on in Ukraine that you know that this guy who's calling you is the number 2 or 3. He's somewhere, you know that he's sort of important. And that way you are much better positioned to take the call, to get the facts, to relate them to us. Okay. I just want to be clear that I understand.
He gave me enormously important facts. I conveyed them all to the State Department. Unlike the media lies, fake news, I wasn't operating on my own. I was operating at the request of the State Department.
Mission for them.
And I have to tell you, John, I knew this back in November.
John or Sean or whatever, I knew I knew this back in November. I don't know what it is that he knew back in November.
Call him John.
I'm not sure if he even knows.
In case it all goes bust, you just call him John.
So here's Giuliani trying to sort of backfill. I don't know exactly what the story they're trying to make here, but here's Donald Trump also trying to do his backfilling, because now it's clear, the reporting is clear, that Trump asked Mulvaney, hold off on the $400 million that Congress has appropriated to the Ukraine. And hold off and tell Congress that you're holding off on it because say that the delays were part of an interagency process, but to give them no additional information. That was a pattern which went on for 2 months. So this started in mid-July. The money was due, and this is according to 3 senior administration officials. So somebody is trying to stick the knife into somebody. And I would bet those senior administration officials are probably coming from the vice president's office. Or maybe there's some vestige of somebody who's left, who's upset. I'm trying to think of who that might be. Somebody who's got, what do they call that? A hairy lip is when you get a little upset? Or a mustache? No, that's Bolton. All right, go.
I have 2 questions. The first is your reaction to the Washington Post story about you supposedly asking and withholding or holding the funds and aid for Ukraine. And the second one is you're meeting tomorrow with Venezuela, with leaders of Latin America to talk about Venezuela. Nicolas Maduro said that if the United States changed the policies of Obama, they will meet with you and they would love to have talks. What do you think?
So here's the story. Very simply, we're watching Venezuela very closely. As far as withholding funds, those funds were paid. They were fully paid. But my complaint has always been, and I'd withhold again, and I'll continue to withhold until such time as Europe and other nations contribute to Ukraine, because they're not doing it. It's the United States. We're putting up the bulk of the money. And I'm asking, why is that? And I want Europe, and it's always been this, and everybody knows it, every single reporter knows it, everybody in the administration knows that what I want, and I insist on it, is that Europe has to put up money for Ukraine also. Why is it only the United States putting up the money? And by the way, we paid that money. But I always ask, why aren't other countries, in Europe especially, putting up money for Ukraine?
Okay, so just so you understand that the Venezuela stuff, he really wanted to get that out of the way. He didn't care about that. He needed to address this. And his argument is the reason why I withheld the money for 2 months and lied about it to Congress, even though they had appropriated it, was because I was mad that the Europeans haven't paid up, which is why then I just gave the money on September 11th. I never publicly said I withheld the money because of the Europeans, and I gave it. I'm doing that in retrospect because that's the most effective way to do it. And I would withhold again, even though I didn't withhold until I used any of the leverage from the withholding, which of course is no leverage against the Europeans if I don't give the money that Congress has already appropriated. So they have yet to figure out how they're going to answer this question. And I think the answer is just going to be complete stonewalling. However, we will have a better sense on Thursday when McGuire has to go in front of the Congress. And the reason why we'll have a better sense on Thursday when McGuire has to go in front of the Congress is because it now appears that the dam has broken. There have been about 10 more over the past 24 hours, Democrats who have come out publicly for impeachment. The latest are 7 freshman congresspeople. They are, I guess, all they consider themselves national security Democrats. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but I have a feeling that means
we're Democrats, but we like killing Yemenis.
That's right. Regardless, they I don't know if they were all they're all vets, I guess, of the military, or the nation's
Several of
defense
them.
and intelligence agencies, according to them. They wrote
One of them
an
is a
op-ed.
Megabucks winner.
And one is a Megabucks winner. And they are all more or less so-called frontline Democrats. I think 5 of them beat Republicans in 2018. The other 2 were in districts that could go either way or was dealing with a retirement. So these are supposedly the poster Congress people for why Nancy Pelosi was not pursuing impeachment. And here is Ro Khanna this morning, right? On C-SPAN, on Washington Journal, basically saying that he thinks the train is about to leave the station.
With an op-ed in the Washington Post about this issue of impeachment, these 7 members of the military and intelligence communities before they came to Congress. Where do you think the caucus line is right now?
I saw that late last night, that op-ed, and I said to a friend, that's a game changer. These are extraordinary members of Congress. They have the most credentials when it comes to national security or military issues. They are many of them are in districts that Trump carried. For them to come out and say this justifies an impeachment inquiry really has changed the tenor in our caucus. You had a number of progressives like me who had called for an inquiry. Now you have moderates and people on frontline districts calling for it. I can't think of something more significant than that op-ed.
Significant enough to move the speaker to pursue impeachment investigations?
I would be surprised if she doesn't officially endorse impeachment investigations at this point. Obviously, you'd have to ask her, but given the breadth of support for that in the caucus, that would be my expectation.
Now, the real question is going to be, like I say, when the Director of National Intelligence shows up at the House Intelligence Committee Thursday and either gives them the whistleblower testimony, commits to allowing the whistleblower to testify to the committee, or not. And there is now talk again about Congress's power to hold people in inherent contempt. Up to this point, all of the rebukes by Congress's subpoenas have been pursued in the courts and still awaiting resolution. And it's a very slow process, and this was deliberate on the part of Nancy Pelosi. But Congress also has the ability to say, okay, we're gonna hold you in contempt, and we have the ability to fine you money, or we can put you in our jail that is in our basement. They literally have a jail there, and they can put you in jail in their basement. Be like being put in the dungeon. I imagine there's going to be just fines. And that will be, when that happens, you know this is for real. I tweeted last night at one point, I am looking forward to the columns saying that Nancy Pelosi played this geniusly, lulling Donald Trump into a false sense of security so that he would go and blackmail a country to get them to produce lies for his campaign. And it worked. So take a victory lap, Nancy, and a call for impeachment.
The psychological needs of people for Nancy Pelosi to be good for certain people are deep.
It's not out there yet, but I find it hard to believe it won't be there.
Right.
I think it will come. We will check that out. In the meantime, before we go to Brian Rosenwald, who actually interviewed me for this book, I had forgotten about that. It was a long time ago. Today's support for today's show comes from Embark. I've mentioned this before. You can discover your dog more than just, fur deep, I guess. With the most accurate dog DNA test kit on the market. Now, When I first heard this, I was like, seriously? Why would anybody do that? And after we read the first ad, first of all, Kelly was into it, and I'm going to read what she sent me. But after the first ad, we heard from a guy who had not only used Embark DNA, but their dog was such an integral part of their family because it was very therapeutic for his brother, who had, I think it was Asperger's. And A, the ability to know more about the dog, and B, to ensure that they're feeding the dog and caring for the dog properly and are aware of any potential diseases the dog may have an inclination for, a biological inclination for, has made them all feel much better about keeping their dog around. Kelly did this for Edie. She said she received Edie's results from Embark, and there's so much information about her. She tested clear for all 171 genetic health conditions. That was that one I had just mentioned. They screened for, and she's not a carrier at risk for any of the genetic diseases they test for. That's got to be a relief. There's also a full clinical trait report. So much great news, but most importantly, I can provide the report to her vet, which will provide so much information to help with Edie's health as she grows up. The dog DNA test from Embark looks at over 250 breeds, 170 genetic health conditions. They apparently analyze more than 100 times more genetic information than any other dog DNA kit. It's accurate down to a 5% breed component. And it's the only company with stellar customer service. Vets and veterinary geneticists on staff will walk you through the Embark results. Right now, for our listeners, Embark has an exclusive summer offer. It's not even summer anymore, it's technically, but you can't get anywhere else. Go to embarkvet.com. Use the promo code majority. Save 15% off your dog DNA test kit. Discover your dog more than fur deep. Visit embarkvet.com. Use promo code majority to save. We'll put a link, obviously, in our liner notes in all our podcast delivery systems. In the meantime, quick break. When we come back, I'll be talking to Brian Rosenwald.
Real quick, John Lewis just called for Trump's impeachment. He's very close to Pelosi, so that's more in your.
Yeah, I think we're very, very close at this point to this being full blown. And we saw just when they changed the rules what it meant in terms of Corey Lewandowski. Things are going to get more aggressive, and I think this is a very good thing because, I mean, we can talk more about it, and I probably said it ad nauseum, but Donald Trump does not want this, and neither do those senators who are running for re-election or the House members. They do not want this to be a referendum on Donald Trump. They want it to be a choice between two people who stink, and they want each race to be as localized as possible. And there's nothing that says national referendum than how you voted on an impeachment vote. We'll take a quick break. We'll come back. Brian Rosenwald on Talk Radio's America, how an industry took over a political party, took over the United States. We'll be right back. Back, Sam Seder on the Majority Report on the phone. It is a pleasure to welcome to the program co-editor-in-chief of Made by History, which is a daily Washington Post history section, and a scholar in residence at the Partnership for Effective Public Administration and Leadership program at the University of Pennsylvania, author of Talk Radio's America, How an Industry Took Over a Political Party That Took Over the United States. Brian Rosenwald, welcome to the program.
Hey, Sam, great to be with you.
So we should say, full disclosure, you and I spoke, I don't know how many years ago it was, 6-7 years ago, when this was a thesis project of yours, back when I, was I guess technically I'm still in radio. I do a terrestrial show on the weekends, Ring of Fire, but was just maybe coming out of my daily radio grind at Air America. And so 9 years.
Yeah, 9 years of research and writing, and most of it was unplanned. I just sort of went where the facts led me.
All right. Well, so, I mean, let's, you obviously, you give a history of the development of talk radio. Give us the or I should say political talk radio. Give us just the sort of the broad strokes so we can get into sort of what the real dynamics are. But just in terms of just the milestones of the history, tell us how it developed.
Well, the real big milestone, August 1st, 1988, Rush Limbaugh goes national at a time that AM radio is desperate for new programming because music sounds better on FM, and because music sounds better, the listeners are going to FM, and with them is going the advertising revenue. And at the same time, there's rules in radio, ideas about what makes for good radio, like the idea that only nationally syndicated radio will only work overnight, that good talk radio has to be local. And the sort of paradigm at the time is Larry King, someone who can, ask good questions in an interview. It can interview everybody from presidents and prime ministers to, mobsters, and then take calls about anything on someone's mind at 3 a.m. It could be abominable snowmen or Yetis or things like that, or, anything. And Limbaugh comes along and reshapes the whole thing. He is providing a product that most people have never heard before. It's the only thing you can expect is to expect the unexpected every day. It's brash, in your face. His perspective shines through every day in everything he does, but it's fun. It's funny. It's conservative. He breaks every norm and every rule, and it catches on like wildfire. And people are calling and saying, "Thank God you're on the air, Rush." And from there, it leads to a series of decisions, every one of which was made in the interest of making money, that reshapes the whole industry, so that today what you have is, stations where most hosts sound like Limbaugh. And you usually have, in a lot of cases, you have a local conservative morning show followed by syndicated talk all day the rest of the day. And that is only possible because, Limbaugh reshapes this whole thing.
Now, there's a couple of things that set this up, too, to a certain extent, right? He starts in 88. That is, we're about, 4 or 5 years out, maybe less, from the Fairness Doctrine being eliminated, right?
Well, the Fairness Doctrine actually goes away in 87, so it's only 1 year.
Okay.
And I think that Limbaugh would have happened without the Fairness Doctrine, and not everyone agrees with that, but my best piece of evidence is that he's been at KFBK in Sacramento. He starts in 84, and he's doing the same show in Sacramento that he would do nationally, and they just have a liberal on the station somewhere. And that's really where the Fairness Doctrine plays such a critical role here, which is the rise of these all-conservative stations. The first couple of all-conservative stations are successful in, ironically enough, Seattle and San Francisco in the early 90s, where KVI in Seattle skyrockets over a couple of years once they start branding themselves as all-conservative and going to all-conservative hosts. And this becomes sort of the idea in the business. And, talking to people in the radio business, they tell you, we're not the most creative lot. The first thing your boss is going to ask you when you say, I want to try this format, is where is it working? And for a lot of these guys, the paradigm became, okay, all conservative stations are where the money's at. But for that to work, you have to have the abolition of the Fairness Doctrine. If the Fairness Doctrine is in place, it mandated overall balance in the station's programming. So a station could have Rush Limbaugh on, but they would have had to have someone like you on as well. to give that overall balance in the day's programming lineup. So that is the key role of the fairness doctrine in this whole process, is that you couldn't have gotten these all-conservative stations that we have today if that was still in place.
All right, so there's two things that strike me. One is that the idea that conservative talk radio explodes in otherwise liberal areas is actually consistent with my experience on Air America, where we would have big audiences in pockets in otherwise red states. And so Austin, Texas, Asheville, North Carolina, to a certain extent, Madison, Wisconsin. I mean, places where maybe they are, you're surrounded by, it's a red state to a certain extent, or there are pockets where people want to hear their perspective and hadn't heard it before.
Yeah, I mean, one thing people have to understand about the radio business is to do well with a major city station, you only need like 3 to 5% of the audience. And as the guy who came up with the idea of putting an all-conservative station on in San Francisco told me, and he happened to be a card-carrying Democrat, he said, the one thing you can't openly be in San Francisco is a conservative. And what talk radio is, in many ways, it's a digital version of the neighborhood bar. And if you're a conservative and you feel maligned in a place like San Francisco, or if you're a liberal and you feel maligned somewhere in a red state, you're looking for someone that shares your perspective, that can say what you think without worrying about upsetting friends, family, coworkers, bosses, and that where you can go and say, hey, I can be myself. My values are respected here. I'm going to hear things that I agree with, that kind of thing. So it makes great sense that you would have done well in places where people felt marginalized or maligned, and where they couldn't be themselves or air their views because they were worried about social pressures and that sort of thing.
And we should say, too, that certainly the theory when we were opening Air America was that the only way to do a sort of a nationally syndicated type of network, and maybe we'll get to that, but the only way to do really successful political talk radio is to have that format consistency throughout the day, because at one point people are going to get they're going to turn their dial from the liberal guy if they're conservative, or vice versa. And, the one thing for radio folks is just like, don't ever give them a reason to change their dial in their car because people are lazy.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the most contested points, I think, among people in the radio business. You've got a good half or 2/3 of people who say you got to have format purity. The example they'll give you over and over is, well, when you tune in the country radio station, you're not going to be happy to hear Beethoven's Fifth. That we don't do this in music radio, so why would talk be any different? Now, what I've seen is that I think you can succeed with people who have very divergent opinions in the same programming lineup, but it's very expensive to do that. You have to brand your station well. You have to advertise it. So Ed Schultz and Rush Limbaugh were number one in their market back-to-back on the same station in North Dakota at one point. But they branded it. They had billboards. They made fun of their sort of divergent opinions and things like that. Or you've got places like KGO in Seattle or in San Francisco that was number one in its market for 30 years. But they were the community hub. They had a big news gathering organization. They had every perspective under the sun, and they were kind of an institution, a heritage station. So it can succeed. It's just much more expensive, especially with the rise of syndicated talk. What you have in terms of all conservative especially, but they this was what Air America was trying to do, is it becomes much more affordable to say, okay, we'll put a local conservative morning show on, and then we'll pluck from the array, the buffet of syndicated options for the rest of the day, and build a programming lineup. And the thing with all conservative talk that the programmers found out was that what they call the TSL, the time spent listening, was really, really, really high. People would turn their dials on and they wouldn't turn it off for record lengths of time, which meant that they could charge higher advertising rates and that things were really successful. And they could do this with syndicated programming that was cheaper to air And so it made sense from a business perspective. And all these decision makers are largely worried about the bottom line, and that's what's driving a lot of this. So it's not to say that you can't succeed with that other kind of format, but it's much harder. And it requires much more money and effort because you are kind of rebuilding your audience in a lot of cases. If the conservative host has a bunch of conservatives, then the liberal host comes on. Well, you'll get some will stick around because they want to scream at the radio, but others are going to go away and say, I don't want to listen to this. And so you have to pull a whole new audience in. And it got, the late Alan Colmes, who most people know as Sean Hannity's sparring partner from Fox, but it got him fired a couple of times when he was number one in the market on talk radio at night, because he would have a really good audience, but that audience wasn't the same audience that the conservative morning show on the same station was going to draw. So they couldn't really use that audience to drive people to that morning show. And in radio, morning drive is sort of the number one day part. And so they said, we need a conservative in here at night. It didn't matter that Colmes was really successful.
That's right, because the audience didn't transfer over. And so, and then let me ask you about it from this end too. I mean, we should also say, radio is a very, the profit margins are razor thin. And so the idea of expending that type of cash is a pretty rare event. To what extent too, is it not just about, that difference? And maybe this is a question that probably would have been more appropriate later. But one of the things that I observed in terms of Air America, and I hope we'll spend a little more time on this, but is that not just is the audience different for a conservative and a liberal talk radio, but the advertisers are different. Like the business model in terms of the advertising is as different between conservative and liberal talk radio in many respects as it would be between, let's say, Spanish and English talk radio. That you're hitting a fundamentally different demographic, and the advertising models are different. What how much did you come across that? And I would imagine it would be conceivable to me that you wouldn't come across it much because there wasn't many people who were advertising directly to just a liberal audience or left.
Well, I think that's true. In a lot of cases, especially after the 1996 Telecommunications Act, which raised the ownership caps again. It was the third time in like 20 years that they had raised the ownership caps. So you've got these giant conglomerates that own tons of stations. So they might own 6 stations in a market. So they were selling like advertising packages. So you don't get as much of it. But I think we're going to see more and more of what you're talking about now and into the future, as opposed to maybe 15, 20 years ago. And the reason is that the cultural profiles are so different, right? Your average liberal is probably, a local gun store, just to pick a kind of caricatured example, is probably not going to advertise on a liberal show.
Right.
That's not their audience. Whereas it might be a really good audience for them on a conservative show. And there are other things like that. And the other big difference is that Fortune 500 companies, the big advertisers, are getting more and more skittish. One thing that really changes for talk radio over the last 15 years is the rise of the internet and media monitoring stuff. So like in the 90s, if somebody like Limbaugh said something offensive to people who were not his audience, people who were not his audience really didn't hear it. They wouldn't know about it. Like if you weren't tuned in on the terrestrial radio station at the moment it happened, you wouldn't hear about it. And this is one reason that like Limbaugh gets in trouble when he does ESPN for football commentary for like 5 minutes. And after like 2 weeks, he gets himself in trouble and is fired. And the reason for that was all of a sudden his content, his regular kind of shtick gets, aired for a broader audience. Well, with the rise of both digital streaming and organizations like Media Matters and their conservative equivalents of that, all of a sudden there's monitoring. All of a sudden you don't just have to be tuned in to hear that thing. And with the rise of social media, that's hurt advertisers because first you find a clip of someone saying something deeply offensive, and then that clip goes viral, and then people start tweeting or Facebooking at the companies advertising on those programs and saying, do you stand for this? Are you okay with this? So as those advertisers say, well, we just want no part of anything political because we're going to offend half the country one way or another,
right.
Then you're going to get more of those kind of niche advertisers who are focused on some demographic characteristic of a liberal audience or a conservative audience. And so I think you're going to see more of this actually going forward than you did in the past.
Yeah, and there's a similar dynamic on YouTube now as well. All right, well, let's talk about. All right, so that's those are some of the sort of the mechanics from an industry perspective. Let's talk about what happened politically. We should just say that like I think I recall I recall George Herbert Walker Bush, and this must have been in like the early 90s. 91 maybe, when he was running for re-election, or I should say election as, or maybe it was re-election. Somewhere around there, he was kissing Rush Limbaugh's ass, right?
Well, what's interesting about this story is he and his White House are actually really slow to catch on to the potential benefits of talk radio. Some of that is when they start Limbaugh doesn't go national until a few months before he's elected. And in those days, if you wanted to hear a radio program, it depended on whether you got AM reception where you were. So if they didn't get the reception in the White House, they have to go out and try and seek it out. And it's always hard when something is developing as an administration's in place to really notice it. So they kind of figure it out late. He does an interview on Limbaugh's show, I forget if it's 90 or 91, when Limbaugh's on vacation because his vacation fill-in at the time was a representative from California by the name of B1 Bob Dornan. For people who don't remember him, he was the sort of forerunner of the House Freedom Caucus. He was this loud, bombastic guy who had been a broadcaster, but because he's a member of Congress, he's got some connections to the White House. So Bush goes on with him. But in 1992, June of 1992, in fact, Limbaugh, now I want to paint this picture for your audience. Limbaugh is a guy who's been fired 4 times as a DJ in the 70s. He's dropped out of college. In 84, he goes to Sacramento. He's talking about Ronaldus Magnus, as in President Reagan. And somebody from the Sacramento Bee bothers to look and finds out that Limbaugh's never even been registered to vote in the decade plus that he's been eligible. Flash forward, however, 8 years, June of 92, and Limbaugh is sleeping in the Lincoln bedroom of the White House, staying overnight, and the president takes his bags from the elevator at the White House to the Lincoln bedroom himself. And Limbaugh talks about this on the Today Show, and he's almost choked up by this. He says, I wish my parents could see this. I wish they were looking at this, because he had issues with his dad sort of thinking he was a failure, and that is sort of the first moment of mainstream Republican embrace of this. And it would only grow with time. Bush really didn't get it. Bill Clinton honestly understood the value of the medium a lot more. But Republicans, beginning especially with Newt Gingrich and his leadership, really get this and reach out to talk radio every day. They are pumping talking points out there. They are having segment suggestions. They are themselves going on. There's one case I recount in the book where Gingrich is just driving on I-95 to go visit his daughter, and Limbaugh says something, and Gingrich pulls over and calls in because he feels like it needs to be addressed. So the whole political world changes in the sort of the mid-'90s as Gingrich becomes the focal point of republicanism as opposed to Bush.
And now this is also the time that Rush Limbaugh, who was, I think, probably the chief promulgator, at least in terms of scope of who heard this from him. The whole Vince Foster murder story gets built basically in this via his platform.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that people need to understand. Talk radio is a show. Talk radio is a soap opera. There are good guys and there are bad guys, and this is not a journalism-based product. I can't stress that more, because hosts play it both ways. Sean Hannity loves to say when he gets in trouble for passing along one of these ridiculous conspiracy theories, he says, well, I'm an entertainer, I'm a talk show host, right? He doesn't say, oh, I'm a journalist. But every night, every day on radio, he's like, you got to tune in tonight to TV. We've got this exclusive thing. Or he'll lead the show by saying, we've got exclusive news for you here tonight. And he has like his own investigative reporter and all this stuff. But none of that goes through the journalistic processes or editorial processes at his network, at Fox. And it's a show. It's a soap opera. And conspiracy theories, they fit with what a lot of the audience is thinking, and they make for a good show. And there's one day he brings the market down in the early 90s because he reports that he's heard from this newsletter that he gets that Vince Foster was murdered in an apartment owned by Hillary Clinton. And the stock market actually goes down because he's pushing this nonsense. And, this is it's a good storyline. It makes for a good show, and it helps to honestly explain the 2016 election. I had a Republican consultant say to me, the thing that you've got to understand, I think this interview took place a couple of months before Election Day, saying, this person said, it makes sense to me that people on the right would think that Donald Trump was maybe the lesser of two evils to Hillary Clinton, because for 25 years, the Clintons have been the villain on this media. Yep. They've been, she says, I know people on the right who see Hillary Clinton as almost demonic. These people are trying to destroy America. And that's the picture painted because that's part of the show. It's part of the soap opera.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I don't know that there's ever been, frankly, a candidate for office in the history of the United States who has generated more revenue for in their opposition than Hillary Clinton in the history of American politics, in terms of the amount of the millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars that were generated around stories about the Clintons, because that was basically those 8 years of Clinton is what basically built Limbaugh, right? I mean, this is where wasn't that basically? I mean, you have the rise through, obviously George Bush's term, but it was Clinton that really cemented it for him.
Yeah, Limbaugh is definitely a cultural phenomenon and a big deal before Clinton. By 91, 92, there are restaurants partnered with local affiliates to have rush rooms so that people can come and have lunch and listen to the show piped in. So he's a very, very big deal at that point. But he is not, what Clinton does, he actually does an interview. Limbaugh does an interview with Playboy. And I can't remember if it's end of 92 or 93, where he says, look, I wanted George Bush to win. I think George Bush would be better for the country. But he doesn't even try to deny. He says, Clinton's good for me. It makes it easier to have a show. I had somebody say, it's easier for a guy like Limbaugh to be outside sort of throwing rocks than it is to be kind of on the inside. And so it gives them something to rail against. It gives them something. It gives them a villain. It gives them something to oppose. Limbaugh begins his program every day during the Clinton years with a sort of spoof of the old Nightline start where he says, America held hostage day number whatever. He calls it the raw deal is how he dubs the Clinton administration. So it is great for him. It gives him something to rail against, and it makes him, especially Bush leaves office, there's a vacuum. It makes him the player in conservative politics. They're doing polling about the presidential primary in 1996, and they're polling Limbaugh. This guy has gone from failed DJ and a guy who worked in group sales and marketing for the Kansas City Royals in the early 80s, and within a decade, he's gone to being polled for a presidential primary.
And this still exists. I mean, I remember back in like 07, examples of congressmen calling into Limbaugh to apologize to Limbaugh for one thing or another. I mean, I can't even remember what it was, but just the idea that you have that you have sitting politicians calling into a radio show to apologize for offending them is stunning. And this has gone on and it expands. And you make the argument that on some level, at one point, Limbaugh and then Sean Hannity is fortunate enough for his career to basically follow Limbaugh in many markets across the country. This is a guy who, frankly, and I don't know, maybe you have a different opinion or maybe it's you don't want to even bring it up, but from the perspective of someone who does this, Limbaugh, I think, incredibly talented at what he does. Sean Hannity, not so talented at what he does, but was tenacious and has been doing it for long enough and was fortunate enough to have the biggest lead in the country and to be owned, I think, by the same company, which is a nice place to be. And that's basically how it starts to grow from there.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have just recounted kind of the consensus in the industry. Everybody, left, right, or center, says Limbaugh is enormously talented. Limbaugh reshaped this. He saved AM radio. There's a lot of respect even for people who hate his views. Hannity is not considered in the same light in terms of talent. Hannity actually gets very, very lucky in two respects. Well, actually three respects. First is he ends up on Fox. And he, at the time, I believe he's still in Atlanta when he starts at Fox, and then he moves shortly thereafter to WABC. He's doing overnights at first in New York radio. But so he gets the audience on Fox, and I think part of what turns Fox onto him is that he's Limbaugh's vacation fill-in at that point. But then really importantly for Sean Hannity, his national show starts on September 10th, 2001. And he's got clearance in 8 of the top 10 markets because at that point he's an ABC show, and so ABC stations take him, and that's unprecedented clearance for day one. So he's reaching a broad audience, and the next day is 9/11, and after 9/11, every news product benefits. People want to talk about this. People are angry. They want to listen to something, and Hannity takes off from that, and it helps to build his show. So definitely Limbaugh has catalyzed a lot of people's careers. He has built this whole industry, and I think most people will tell you that nobody else has his talent. None of these guys have his talent. And some are more talented, some are less talented, and they all have slightly different flavors of conservatism. But he helps build this entire industry, and it's had an increasingly large political impact over the last 2 decades.
Place the political impact. I want to talk about the political impact, both in terms of like how much, at what point, how much Rush Limbaugh was driving the Republican agenda. I mean, obviously, if Newt Gingrich is pulling over on the radio on the side of the highway because he's got to clarify stuff with Limbaugh, he's already at that point by the mid-90s has an incredibly influential role in the Republican Party. Certainly when Obama got into office in 2008, he spent the first 3 or 4 months of his presidency basically making Rush Limbaugh the intellectual pillar of the Republican Party, which was the case, actually. But I'm curious as to, how you measure that. If there is a point where you saw Limbaugh's peak sort of influence. But I also want to talk about the other side of that, because from my perspective, one thing I've been aware of is that you had, particularly when you're talking about like sort of the B-level guys, the Michael Medveds, guys who were like maybe regional or smaller national shows, they all worked at Town Hall. They all had sinecures at either an online website, or they were getting a lot of like ads from Hillsdale College, which gets its money from the Heritage Foundation. There was a tremendous amount of ideological money that was, which is not to say that they weren't getting corporate, money, but I'm saying there was a lot of ideological money that was, if not paying them to be on the radio, paying them when they were off the radio, which allowed them to be on the radio.
Yeah, there's a lot of this kind of murky network, and it's something that I wasn't able to get into as much. But, even down to a place like Heritage buying a lot of copies of somebody's book. And Hillsdale definitely is buying ads on a lot of these people's shows and things like that. But I'll give you the best example of the synergy because it goes back further. 1997, I happened across a recording of a random Limbaugh show, and I wasn't really listening to, expecting anything special. It was just that there are so few available shows of his from the 90s that you kind of listen to whatever you can get your hands on because you want to hear what's going on, how it sounds, the tenor, the tone. And we get to a commercial, and I'm only half listening. And what does Rush Limbaugh launch into a live read for? And live read meaning he's reading the ad himself? Fox News. at that time the very new Fox News. And he does this whole spiel about how, all that stuff we've talked about other networks being about the reporters' opinions. This is going to be different, and this is the place to go and call your cable company and ask them to add this channel. And ends with Fox News is fair news, yeah. And it shows that there's this deeply interconnected network. Hannity is the second most important radio talker today, and he's, in some cases, he might be first given how close he is to the White House. But he's also, been on Fox News from day one. You've got even some of the guests are conservative hosts on Fox. You're right that these people have columns. Salem, which owns a network of radio stations, and they are the one owner for whom ideology is what drives what goes on their airwaves. It's only conservative talk and Christian talk. And they also own Town Hall, Red State, and I'm blanking on the third one, but another big conservative digital platform. Yeah, they own like three of them. They bought them over time. And so you get these things. Newsmax is now a television network and a digital site. So there's all of this cross-pollination. It's one big network that exists to feed conservative Americans content that is going to valorize their views, that is going to give them a clubhouse because these people feel marginalized and scorned by those who disagree. And that's really what this exists. They realize there's a market for this.
All right. So where is it now? I mean, because it seems to me that YouTube has in some way supplanted, at least in the YouTube and has supplanted this to a certain extent. Like, I don't read about Limbaugh that much at all anymore. Now, I know from a conservative perspective, Limbaugh is still their leader, right? But it is also like guys like Levin, who has cross platforms. He's on radio and he's co-partner with Blaze TV. Glenn Beck did the same thing. And when we talk about associations, Glenn Beck was heavily financed by Americans for Prosperity. I know back in the aughts quite a bit. His whole 9/12 stuff and, the Tea Party was, you had Sean Hannity, so doing Tea Party rallies that were all the audience was being bussed in by Koch brothers money. I mean, there was a lot of money sloshing around during the aughts. It feels like part of it is online now and part of it's on radio. Ben Shapiro has a radio show and an online thing. I mean, where is the center of gravity? Is it more or less the same? Limbaugh has he been eclipsed on some level? Does it matter?
So what I say to people is this is a little bit like if you were the only supermarket in a one supermarket town. Back in the 90s, talk radio was the only place Republicans could go if they wanted to get a message to their base. If they wanted to sort of take the temperature of their base and segment a message. Now there are a lot of platforms, and there are a lot of people competing for conservative eyeballs, ears, and clicks, which means that it's actually driven the content not just further to the right, but driven it tactically towards the extreme, driven it towards people saying shut the government down over this or that or the other thing. Because the one thing a host doesn't want to appear to be is impure. They don't want to risk having the upstarts say, you listen to that guy for all those years, or you watch Fox for all those years, but Fox hasn't adapted with the time. They don't get it. Come watch us. So that's driven the content. But from a political standpoint, all they've done is make the megaphone stronger. All they've done is these people are all on the same page most of the time. It's not like there's a morning meeting. Some people, I think, see conspiracies and say, oh, there's like some morning meeting where they're all taking marching orders or something like that. It doesn't work like that. A lot of these guys are friends, Limbaugh and Hannity. Hannity used to be on opposite Neil Bortz in Atlanta. And they would text each other, not texting, it's probably before texting, but they'd call each other during their breaks because they were buddies. You have a lot of these relationships, Levin and Hannity. These guys are friendly. John Boehner did this interview with Politico after he retires where he says, who was that nutty guy at night, Levin, always screaming at the radio, Mr. Producer, this or that. That's his shtick. He dragged Rush and Hannity, far to the right. So there's this cross-pollination. Limbaugh still sets the agenda for talk radio in a lot of ways. He's the king. When he says something, other people are listening. People are tuned in. They're following. They're figuring out what is Rush saying. And that sort of sets the agenda for what the people the rest of the day are talking about, maybe even into the next morning. But, the Fox primetime people, Ingram had a radio show. Hannity does radio and television. So there's a lot of this cross-pollination that sets the message. So that is sort of the political piece of it. You're right, however, that the delivery mechanism is changing. I don't know if in 10 years people are going to put up with terrestrial radio. What is it, 22 minutes an hour of commercials? People don't really want to listen to that.
Well, they're not going to put up with that model, right? I mean, they still may get it on terrestrial, but it's not going to be that model.
Right. I mean, what I'm saying is I think the delivery mechanism is changing here. I think that the content is just as powerful. I think that you see that every day in the Trump administration, first of all, because he's taken his style directly from talk radio and cable news, but also because, last winter we have a government shutdown in part because Limbaugh, they have a deal, and Trump's apparently told the Republican leadership, I'll sign off on this CR, continuing resolution, and then Limbaugh and others go crazy, and the next day Trump texts Limbaugh or something and says, hey, we're going to hold the line, we're going to shut this down if they don't give me the wall money. They have that kind of impact. We've heard about, Limbaugh played golf with Trump. Hannity's advising Trump. They're always talking. Tucker Carlson was with Trump in North Korea or for that last summit. They weren't in North Korea, but, summit with the North Koreans, all of this kind of thing. So the impact is there. But the delivery mechanism, I think, is shifting. I think that people are going to say, AM radio in 10 years might look like the print newspaper does today, kind of going by the wayside of once great medium. But I don't think the content is going away because there's still a market for it. People say, well, what about, younger, the demographics are so old on cable news and talk radio. And that's true. But again, we go back to those original all conservative stations. 3 to 5% is all they needed to be successful in the market, right? Well, if you're a millennial, if you're one of the 1 in 3 millennials or Gen Zers who are conservative, you might even feel more social pressure not to voice your opinions. You might be even more looking for something like Ben Shapiro or in Daily Wire, and he's done successful. He's been successful with a younger audience. He told me, I interviewed him for the book. He told me, my demographics are young because it doesn't take. You don't need 70% of the people who care about politics in a demographic to be successful. And I think that one thing that you're going to see as the medium changes, as podcasting and YouTube become the thing, as opposed to, terrestrial radio, is you're going to get more ideological diversity, more of what you're doing, where there is a market for everything. Because, one thing that kept liberal radio off of the airwaves is there's a paucity of 50,000 watt stations, what we call flamethrower stations. And the example I use for audiences that are not familiar is when I was a kid, we used to take vacations, drive up to Maine, drive down to North Carolina, and at night you could go out to the car and listen to the Phillies. Why I wanted to listen to the Phillies when they were perpetually terrible, I don't know. But, didn't want to miss a game. You could go out and listen to it because the station was so strong. You could hear it, 8-9 hours away. Well, there was a limited number, only a couple hundred of those stations. Well, but in the digital space, there is no limiter like that. Right. There is no, if you're not on this station, you're not going to get heard by as many people. It's if you've got talent, if you produce something good that people want to hear, that there's an audience for, there's a market for it. And the barrier to entry is much lower. So I think you're going to get more ideological diversity out of that.
Let's just talk a little bit about Air America. I mean, what else? I mean, what can you tell me about that experience? Because they're really, conservatives have dominated talk radio, and we had there's been, some amount of liberal talk radio in certain pockets locally and this and that, but Air America was the only real attempt, and I guess, Schultz and Stephanie Miller were sort of concurrent in developing a national presence. I mean, what's your take from all that? I mean, you point out rightly that there just wasn't as many. There wasn't just as many outlets available that were free, that were willing, and to the extent that there were, Air America had to come in and either buy them or rent them all the entire day.
So Air America, I think I spent in my doctoral dissertation, I think I spent 18 pages explaining why Air America itself failed. And a lot of the questions, or a lot of the reasons had to do specifically with Air America, with management decisions, constantly changing management that had different visions for what the network would be. You know, they start on day one and they're already in the hole because the founder is kind of a scam artist who said there's all this money in the bank that isn't there. And they had an enormously expensive vision. And I wonder what would have happened if they had, you know, $500 million sitting around to finance this. But there are other factors that are broader to why liberal talk hasn't succeeded. So the first is that for liberal audiences, you know, when you talk to people in the radio business and you say, well, why hasn't liberal talk succeeded? They say, well, that's not true. It has succeeded. And their answer is, well, there's NPR, or, oh, there's urban or African American talk formats, or Latino talk radio, which is all very successful. And a lot of people say, well, wait a second, you know, that's not the equivalent of Rush Limbaugh. That's not politically in your face kind of talk, sort of what Air America was trying to be. But what it is if you picture the Democratic coalition as a three-legged stool, you've got young voters, you've got minority voters, and you've got sort of highly educated professionals, suburbanites. And the last group is listening to NPR. The first group, the young voters, are interested in formats like Guy Talk or Howard Stern, which is Howard Stern kind of thing. And then your minority communities often have this robust talk product in their communities, but it's a little bit more diverse than the political talk radio. They might get into politics, but they might also talk about community needs. They might also be talking about religion. They're much more diverse thematically. And so what you've got is those things are all eroding the audience, the potential audience for liberal, in-your-face talk. And so that's one factor. The second factor is you get a lot of people in liberal talk. The first attempts at liberal talk in the 90s are people like Mario Cuomo, or Gary, or not Gary Hart. Gary Hart, the Colorado senator.
Gary Hart.
Yeah, it is Gary Hart. I'm thinking to myself, no, you got the first name wrong, but I did get it right. These are people who are failed politicians. They're not people who are trained in radio. And over and over and over again, when you talk to the best people in radio, left, right, or center, they all started like Limbaugh as DJs, like in their teenage years, or they started as legal experts for 10 years before they got a show. They learned the craft of radio. Well, Air America brings a lot of very talented people on. But you put somebody like Al Franken on the radio, he's never done the radio before, and it's a little bit of a unique product. And, you know, I talked to Mark Maron, who was on Air America and has become maybe one of the most successful, if not the most successful, podcaster out there. And he said, you know, it took me 2 years to figure out what a good radio show would sound like and what we wanted to be doing. And by the time we hit that, you know, we hit our stride, there was 3 management teams later, and they had a very different vision for what Air America was going to be, and they weren't willing to let us build the audience now that we were really doing high-quality political satire type stuff. And you hear that over and over and over again, where either people came in, and even funny, entertaining people thought that their goal was sort of a political mission. They were trying to mirror what they heard from Limbaugh without understanding that when Limbaugh goes national and takes off, he tells an early interviewer, you know, there are 3 reasons people listen to the radio: entertainment, entertainment, entertainment. And that's what he's trying to do in the early days. But they don't hear that. So either they're trying to do that or they're finding their voice. And in a lot of cases on their shows, there were 2 or 3 people who were thrust together without much of in the way of rehearsals to figure out, well, what do we sound like together? How do we want to make this work? What's our brand going to be? And realistically, most of the attention to Air America is at the beginning. It's this setup where you need to have a really sleek operation from day one, both in terms of the quality of the product and the distribution model, and being able to get to people because it's getting buzz in the New York Times and everywhere else. And it's at a moment where liberals are the ones who feel marginalized. This is 2004. Republicans control both houses of Congress. They control the White House. They control the Supreme Court, you know, leans right. And liberals are really, really angry at mainstream broadcast media because they're mad about the war, and they're mad about the aftermath of the 2000 election that felt stolen and they felt like wasn't covered that way. And so there is a crying need for Air America, for a liberal voice. And they have this opportunity, and the only person who really hits the ground running perfectly on day one is Randy Rhodes, who's a veteran radio host. And, this is nothing new for her. And everybody else, it takes some time to kind of hit their strides, to figure out what they're doing. But by the time they hit their strides, the network's deeply in the red. They're struggling to get on in places, and that early attention is kind of fading. And it would have taken a lot of money at that point to pull an audience in, and they're already doing something that's really, really hard. They had like the $1 billion vision with none of the financing. Fox News loses like $250 million in its first few years.
Yeah.
Like, to build a network, you need a lot of money. So there are so many factors that play a role. And I'm sorry that the answer was a little bit long, but it's just a big, complicated picture.
No, it brings back a lot of horrible memories, and I appreciate that. I can tell you that when Marin got fired, it was literally like 2 weeks after Howard Stern left terrestrial radio. And the way I would describe that would be like if, because Marin, of course, was sort of our version of Howard Stern, the neurotic, undersexed Jew in the morning, talking about politics. And I would walk around at that point. I was saying, like, it's like Coca-Cola just announced we're pulling our cola from the supermarkets, and a Brooklyn soda company says, "Oh, you're pulling your cola? Well, in that case, we'll pull our cola. Take that." And it obviously didn't work. It was stupid.
There's an opportunity here, and what ends up developing over time is first MSNBC moves left, and so you get people like Rachel Maddow, who certainly she doesn't have the bandwidth of Rush or the influence of Rush politically, but she's important. Chris Hayes, people like that. In the 90s or the 2000s, it was Keith Olbermann. And now you have things like Pod Save America, or on the far left, Chapo Trap House and things that podcasts, we're starting to see liberal media develop to a much greater extent, that this perspective-driven stuff. But, Air America, I wish I could go back and rerun the experiment with, a lot more money behind it and see what happens.
Or even moderately competent management. I mean, I can tell you that, like, the most successful time we had was while we were in bankruptcy, when there was literally no one at the helm and each show operated. Our burn rate was, like about somewhere between 25% and 15% of what it had been prior. Everybody was doing fine. There was about 5 different times where I think that it could have come back and worked. And I will say this about radio executives. They need a big, wide margin of error, because these are not nimble thinkers. And the people that we had at the end, they were so befuddled by what opportunities were online. It was shocking. I mean, just shocking.
You wonder, if Air America really hits the digital thing hard, whether they kind of become Pod Save America a decade earlier.
Yes.
There's so many kind of counterfactuals that you could run about that. But what it comes down to is that it wasn't producing a product at the moment that people most wanted it, that was sort of really high quality. And I don't just mean the host, I mean also the technical product and where people could find it. And that they didn't have the money. Limbaugh, in some markets, it took Limbaugh 2 years to be successful. The guy who put him on in Chicago, who said to me, today my bosses wouldn't have let me try that show for 2 years. They would have said, get like Spanish polka music on, let's try something different. Yeah. But they gave him time to build an audience. Air America needed to hit immediately, and they hadn't done the kind of rollout stuff beforehand, letting people experiment and figure out their voices and things like that would have let them have the perfect product on day one. It took time. And that's the one thing people don't ever afford you anymore. So, it really does, it's hard to assess Air America versus liberal radio more broadly. And there have been voices like Tom Hartman and Stephanie Miller who have been successful. There's been no one who's been Limbaugh-esque. And I think that by the time you get to the 2000s, there's another problem here. At the beginning, Limbaugh's audience is like 25% liberal. It's people who might be laughing in spite of themselves or who want to scream at the radio. But over time, liberals give up on AM radio. They say, well, why do I want to listen to this? This is, all this stuff that I hate and hateful and awful and all, all these people from G. Gordon Liddy to Hannity, those kinds of people. And so to bring them back to AM radio, to Air America, they needed a lot of money, and it just wasn't there. Yeah. And if you're, Clear Channel, now iHeartMedia, and they did put Air America on in some of their clusters. But if it's the third or fourth most important station in the cluster, they're not going to devote that kind of advertising money to it. And it's not a political thing. It's a business thing. If, you just don't sink that much money into your third or fourth property in that market because it's not good business.
Right.
And without that, people weren't going to come back. They didn't know it was there. They could drive across town and lose the signal, because it was on some high-numbered station that didn't have much of a signal. And so there were all these obstacles. And, maybe if there had been a liberal Limbaugh, somebody who really reshaped things, if Jon Stewart, instead of being on the Daily Show, had been on the radio, this might have been different. You might have gotten liberal radio. But he happens to go into late-night comedy, and he colonizes that, arena. And you haven't seen conservatives on late-night comedy really successfully. And radio ends up being the opposite.
Well, Brian Rosenwald, the book is Talk Radio's America, How an Industry Took Over a Political Party That Took Over the United States. Really, obviously, very interesting stuff to me, and I think even more broadly. And so I appreciate your time with us, and we will put a link to your book at majority.fm.
Sam, it was great talking with you, and I'd love to do it again.
All right. Thanks, Brian. Bye-bye.
All right. Take care.
All right, folks. There you have it. Now, with that said, just got some breaking news. About 10 minutes ago, Howard Feynman, and some of this at this point there is no doubt in my mind that some of this is also people getting out ahead of this and attempting to box her in. When Ro Khanna comes on C-SPAN in the morning and says, I would be very surprised if Nancy Pelosi did not come out for impeachment. What that does, that's either indicative of one or two things. One, that he knows that she's going to. Or two, that he wants to make it that much harder for her not to do that. Because the expectations are raised, people presume it's going to happen, that puts pressure on her. Howard Feynman reports that a very solid Democratic House leadership source, this is, remember, John Lewis has just come out for impeachment, just confirmed to me that Speaker Pelosi will announce a formal impeachment inquiry this afternoon and imply that she herself favors impeachment of Donald Trump. And so we're headed into a new era, ladies and gentlemen, where Donald Trump is going to be on the defense consistently. And there's going to be this argument from the Republicans that somehow the Democrats are on a witch hunt. They're not doing their job. It's a very difficult argument for them to make. Certainly, with everyone in their coalition will believe it, but they have passed something like 65 bills in the House that they did in the first 6 months, 8 months, ranging from a $15 minimum wage to fixes on health care to broad anti-corruption bills. People remember H.R. 1? I mean, this is good stuff. Nobody cared. Nobody cared. And so the idea that the Republicans are going to demand some type of action on something, what would they demand action on? You guys are not dealing with wealth inequality. You're not dealing with, this is, and this is going to take some pressure off of the presidential candidates to deal with Donald Trump and allow them the opportunity to offer a better vision. I will tell you right now, who is unhappy about this? And it's Joe Biden. And I will explain to you why. In fact, I wasn't going to play this till later, but there's a reason why Joe Biden would be the least excited about the Democrats in the House pursuing impeachment, because Joe Biden has built, and this is what I think is also another example of the Achilles heel of his campaign. Joe Biden's campaign has one message. That message is Donald Trump is a horrible guy. Donald Trump has no integrity. Donald Trump is untrustworthy. He's dishonest. He's vulgar, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I've argued that this is a liability because the one arena that Donald Trump can play on is like, you can throw mud at me, but I can throw mud at you. And the only way that Donald Trump is going to win is if his opponent is so muddy and smelly that that opponent's own supporters are like, I don't like it. And they don't show up to vote. That has been the strategy. It was a strategy with Hillary Clinton. It'll be the strategy with the next person. And if you are running on a platform of, I smell good, I look good, I'm clean, and I smell sweet, you are very vulnerable to Donald Trump throwing mud at you. If you are running on a platform of this policy or that policy or returning America to an economic period with this or with that, healthcare, Donald Trump can keep throwing mud on you and you may not smell so great, but that wasn't your appeal in the first place. And when there are other avenues to attack Donald Trump, what do you have left to say if you're Joe Biden? And here is a preview of, I think, of what Joe Biden's, the rest of his campaign is. He finds himself in a situation where he, I guess, gets a sense that this reporter is somewhat hostile to him, and he's completely flummoxed. This is in Iowa, right? Is this in Iowa? And a reporter, I get the sense that I don't know, what venue she's from, but I think it's just basically, Iowa reporter has this exchange with Joe Biden while he is ready to. I'm not sure what this. Maybe this is in his offices in Iowa, but go ahead.
Well, in Iowa, the unemployment rate is 2.5%. People say they are employed in Iowa and their small businesses are growing. Iowa picked Trump by...
They were employed before he got elected.
The president won by 10 percentage points in Iowa.
I'm not suggesting he didn't win by 10 percentage points. What I'm suggesting is he's not the reason for the unemployment rate being down.
But why should people want to make a change, though?
Well, that's up to them to decide.
Why should they?
It's for them to decide.
Well, make your case.
I'm not going to.
I like that, though. She was like, yeah, F you. You're not giving me a good interview. Get out of here.
Well, it's not.
I'm old.
This is pretty basic stuff. What's your pitch to the American public?
Can I quote? This is Alexander Coburn from 2008. Change and hope are not words one associates with Senator Biden, a man so ripely symbolic of everything that is unchanging and hopeless about our political system that a computer simulation of the corporate political paradigm senator in Congress would turn out Biden in a nanosecond.
Yeah, but to be fair, that was 11 years ago.
Right. No, he's been very transformed. The first duty of any...
But this is, I'm sorry, like, how do you not have an answer to that question? Now, maybe you want to say like, oh yeah, no, we're not going to even campaign in Iowa in terms of the general election, right? Like, yeah, like in the general election, we don't care. I mean, I guess one could have said like, well, listen, right now I'm running in the primary, and you can ask Democratic voters themselves, do they not want Donald Trump? But the problem is, and then she says, well, okay, but what's your argument that you're going to appeal to people outside of the Democratic Party? Because this is the conventional wisdom that he needs to do that. But what's going to compel them to come and vote for you?
I like Iowa about as much as I like you, young lady.
Sounds like a trick question.
I mean,
stop trying to trick me.
Right. Oh, now I got to ask for people's votes?
Hold on, my brother's got Gazprom on the phone.
But the problem is that with impeachment ongoing, and it's not going to go anywhere, but it's going to hold Donald Trump to account. Joe Biden's going to have less things to say, frankly, on some level, I think, but we'll see. All right, we're going to take a quick break. Head into the.
Do you see this? This is kind of the same thing. Biden this is from I think reporter Tyler Pager. Biden getting into a disagreement with a voter over his healthcare plan. She says his plan is protecting insurance companies' profits. He questions whether she would pay higher taxes for it. She says yes. He responds, "You got the right candidate in Bernie." Then.
Yeah.
Thank you.
He is.
You mean president? You mean Mr. President?
We have moved into the part of the campaign where Joe Biden's like. You think I'm actually? I mean, how much work am I supposed to do for this?
If the third way poll
we got to take
was
quick
supposed
break.
to go out.
Listen, folks, you can support this program by becoming a member at jointhemajorityreport.com. When you do, you are supporting the free show. You are getting extra content. I posted. What was the interview? What was that video that yesterday that got demonetized? That I was like,
public option will fail.
Public option would fail. We were playing a clip of somebody's testimony about public option. We got demonetized. All of our daily shows for the past, 3 weeks, not all of them. If we've done 12, then 10 or 11 have been demonetized. I imagine it's going to be a blip, but this is what happens with YouTube. We say the words ABORTION, and maybe things get demonetized, or we talk about GUNS and things get demonetized.
We'll see if those censors can spell.
Yeah, we'll
talk
see.
about CIA. Oops.
Yeah. And but it's our members that basically allow me to get at least 3 or 4 hours of sleep a night and not have to worry about that. And so you can become one of those people at jointhemajorityreport.com. Don't forget the AM Quickie. I think on Friday, we're going to try and put it up on its own feed, and within a week, it'll be exclusively available on its own feed. We're going to ask you to go subscribe on the day that it's that we launch it, so that we can sort of like push it up into the charts, whether it's on Stitcher or wherever it is, or however you listen to your podcast. And we want you to subscribe to it and help us. And I think you'll enjoy it. 5 minutes. It's never longer than 5 minutes. It gives you some of the top stories of the day, give you a sense of what's happening. The AM Quickie. Right now, it's available in the Majority Report audio feed, and you can check it out there. And finally, justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code Majority, get 10% off. And lastly, don't forget, today's episode was supported by Embark DNA. You can discover your dog beyond just like whatever Fluffy looks like or whatever Spot looks like. People are like, what kind of dog do you have? I don't know. Some type of mutt. Well, now you can say, first of all, when I say that in front of my child, it's really upsetting to them. And so you don't want to say that in front of your dog either. Embark DNA, it's the most accurate dog DNA test kit on the market. It looks at over 250 breeds, and for a dog owner, even more importantly, 170 genetic health conditions that allow you to determine what's the best way to feed or care for your dog, what might be a problem in the future to keep an eye out for in terms of disease. Right now, for our listeners, Embark has an exclusive summer offer you can't get anywhere else. You can go to embarkvet.com. Use the promo code Majority to save 15% off your dog DNA test kit. You can discover your dog more than fur deep. Visit embarkvet.com. Use the promo code Majority to save. Michael, today is Tuesday.
Yes. CIA DRUGS will be one of the topics. tonight. Also, Michaela Wilkes, who's running for Congress, running against Steny Hoyer. Another of these very inspiring candidates hopefully taking out some of the least inspiring people in the history of Earth. We'll be talking with her about criminal justice, reform, single payer, and foreign policy. New Lula interview on the BRICS, which was actually just sent to me directly, plus Mike Racine on the national security state and Hollywood, and how Saudi Arabia subcontracts everyone from the Sudanese to the Pakistanis to fight its wars for them, maybe even the United States. What does that mean for Iran, even as Israel coalesces around a unity apartheid government with Bibi and Gantz? That's at 7. At 6, a special stream with Kyle Kolinsky, Michael Brooks Show on YouTube, patreon.com/TMBS, where we just did an illicit history of social democracy with Bhaskar Sunkara.
Jamie.
This week on the Antifada, we speak with Aaron Bastani of Novara Media about a little bit of the Brexit stuff and more so his new book, Fully Automated Luxury Communism. We kind of interrogate what he means by that, bring up some of the critiques that have been raised about it. I think it's pretty good, if I do say so myself. Also, I am recording a new episode of my side project, The Vampire Castle, the only podcast with that name that is all about actual vampires, with Leslie Lee III from Struggle Session, and that should be out Friday for our patrons at patreon.com/theantifada.
Matt.
Coming up for Literary Hangover this weekend is a solo episode I did myself, recorded it late last night. I hope it turned out well. I haven't listened back yet, but it's on Hobomok, for the first novel by abolitionist writer Lydia Maria Child. So look forward to that.
See you in the fun half. Left is best. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
You know, I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous? You're a little bit upset? You're riled up?
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude, you want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
Some good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457-238. 56, 27, 1/2, 5 eighths, 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy.
Dance, dance, dance. Rand Paul. I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're nothing.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabber.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good. Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey, Sam. Hey, Andy. You guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
That guy might be a Nazi.
Agreed.
No.
Death to America.
You.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way! Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook. Throw our hands up.
Ooh.
Wow.
but Sam, I gotta get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me,
Hey! Shut up!
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.
We're back, ladies and gentlemen. It is the fun half. I, of course, neglected to call into the phone system. Yesterday, as you know, we did not get to many calls. We will try and do that. This is Donald Trump gave a pretty bizarre UN speech, wouldn't you say?
I would say it was low energy.
It was low energy, but some of these things are a little bit weird. Going up there and chastising media and academic institutions.
Oh, yeah. It was sort of a Stephen Miller special.
Saying that open borders are promoted only by sex traffickers. That to me seems like a rather, extreme vision of things.
Yeah, it would seem to be a bit of an overgeneralization.
I mean, a little bit, just a little bit. It sort of sounds like somebody who is like terrified of getting, I don't know, impeached. And so relying on really sort of a lot of riling a base, maybe. I don't know.
Oh, he's going to get so awesome as this thing progresses.
Yeah, this is going to get, it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better, folks. Here is Donald Trump in front of the UN General Assembly, heavily sedated, but arguing that media and academic institutions are assaulting time.
A faceless bureaucracy operates in secret and weakens democratic rule. Media and academic institutions push flat-out assaults on our histories, traditions, and values. In the United States, my administration has made clear to social media companies that we will uphold the right of free speech. A free society cannot allow social media giants to silence the voices of the people, and a free people must never, ever be enlisted in the cause of silencing, coercing, canceling, or blacklisting their own neighbors.
Wow. First of all, the idea that he's literally delivering the Dave Rubin portion of the speech, right? Media and academic institutions,
grievance studies,
are pushing flat out assaults on our histories, traditions, and values. Gavin McInnes has been deplatformed. Milo Yiannopoulos can't even get more than 20,000 followers on Gab.
People are blogging about Dave Chappelle.
It's really, really bad right now. So much so that I took 14 Xanax before I gave this speech.
So much so that I'm actually using the department, or he probably has no idea, but the Department of Education is actually threatening universities. Because if their Middle East studies programs deal with Palestinian human rights, as an example.
Duke and UNC have a joint Middle East program that the Title 10 funding is being threatened to being pulled from unless there's more Judeo-Christian values that are put in there.
And helps our security.
Best defense is a good offense.
But Donald Trump is not done at the UN. He sleepily also says that the question of borders and immigration is a function of sex trafficking. Wonder why that was on his mind so much.
Which I hate.
I hate that. Totally opposed to that.
Once I get a wife, why would I care?
Here in the United States and around the world, There is a growing cottage industry of radical activists and non-governmental organizations that promote human smuggling. These groups encourage illegal migration and demand erasure of national borders.
Eurasia.
Today I have a
I knew
message
her.
for those open border activists who cloak themselves in the rhetoric of social justice. Your policies are not just. Your policies are cruel and evil. You are empowering criminal organizations that prey on innocent men, women, and children. You put your own false sense of virtue before the lives, well-being, and countless innocent people. When you undermine border security, you are undermining human rights and human dignity.
I mean, this is pretty stunning stuff from Donald Trump. All right, so here's one more clip of Donald Trump
Another
at the
thing
United
about
Nations.
human traffickers, sorry, I'm a little slow, is they demand payment in full for services rendered. It's another thing that we don't like about them.
Getting up on that Zan.
This COD is the worst thing that has ever been developed in the Western world.
No trust.
There's no trust.
Many of these smaller
China.
operations will say that a girl is from one part of the world and then send you one from another. So customers are deceived and disappointed. This injustice will not stand.
You think you're getting a bride from Belarus, and it turns out she's from Azerbaijan.
You've paid Ukrainian prices for Kazakh product.
You think you're helping them, you're just making them more ornery.
Erasure. Are we almost done yet?
Simply promise them that you are just going to make more money, not going to have to be president or via first lady. And you gave them a child and they still unhappy.
Still
All right.
unhappy.
Well, so here's Donald Trump. I want you to watch this next clip of Donald Trump at the UN General Assembly. You will see reaction shots from the ghouls that they brought to the speech, who are all, and I noticed Mike Pompeo yesterday when Trump was trying to explain about why he withheld payments or was going to withhold payments or corruption. And Pompeo sits there and he's got a thing where he's like, you can tell. I mean, I've been in these situations where you lock your jaw and you're just like, don't smile. Don't make any reaction whatsoever. Just look forward. And all of these people are well practiced at it. And they have to do this because they cannot indicate, they can't believe that this guy is the president. And so here it is. This is clip number, this is 5? Yeah, do 4 first, and then we'll do 5. We'll give the reactions. And then you got to see the reaction from somebody on Fox News, just so that you get a sense of just like how deluded these people are. I mean, right now, I couldn't be less sympathetic to Donald Trump. I have more sympathy for inanimate objects that I come across on any given day than I do for Donald Trump. And I'm worried there's something really wrong with him in this instance. Just listen to him try and deliver this speech. He's got it going really slow. The teleprompter's moving so slow. He's, presumably he's read it at least once, and he can't make out the words. And he's talking. He is so sedated. And so let's play this clip of him trying to just say fire tire.
Americans will never fire or tire in our effort to defend and promote freedom of worship and religion. We want and support religious liberty for all.
There you go. I mean, how heartfelt that is. We will never fire or tire. What would happen if you fire in your pursuit of...
You're fired. I mean...
We will... You're tired. Here, look at these.
Everybody's-
Now let's listen and just
Except
look at
for
these
the
people. Look at,
Israeli delegation is fired.
I don't think I've ever seen a speech that has been delivered with less sort of seemingly connection to the words than this one. But look at the looks on these lunatics here. You've got Mike Pence, Mike Pompeo. You've got, is that Kevin McCarthy? No, that's not Kevin McCarthy. But who is that? Oh, that's McGuire. Is that McGuire?
Probably McGuire.
And Wilbur Ross. And then you have Steve Mnuchin's wife. I think. Is that it? Well, no. Oh, she's the UN ambassador. Oh, she's the new UN ambassador. Okay. And then Mnuchin's behind her.
Right.
Okay.
Here we go.
It is the divide between those whose thirst for control deludes them into thinking they are destined to rule.
There you go.
Thirst. I'm gripping the root.
So you've watched these clips of Donald Trump, and even if you despise this man, you have to be like, I'm concerned because there's something really wrong with him. However, KT McFarland, she's found something to like.
Watching the president's speech together, KT, if you could first tell us what you just saw and the words of the president, what struck you?
I think this is his best speech ever.
What?
And look at the body language. He was confident. He was reading slowly. He didn't repeat himself a bunch of times.
Pause it. Wait a second. Can we just go back to the body language for a moment? Pop up a video of him. The body language was confident. He's literally sort of looks like he is about to pass out. Go ahead, play. Look at this body language.
It's called being relaxed.
Play this. Look at this body language.
This bureaucracy operates in secret and weakens
what kind of
democratic rules.
First of all, he can't open his eyes.
Media and academic institutions push flat
What is
out
the
assault.
body language here that we're supposed to be looking like? How else would you deliver this speech?
Relax.
Like
He's so relaxed and confident.
Who delivers a speech like that? Wait, go ahead. The body language, so confident, speaking slowly, didn't repeat himself. Fire, tire. He just changed the way. Go ahead.
You just saw and the words of the president, what struck you?
I think this is his best speech ever. And look at the body language. He was confident. He was reading slowly. He didn't repeat himself a bunch of times, which he has always done in the past. And the other thing is, how many times did he talk about himself? I never counted one. He was talking about the country. He was talking about the things that he wanted Americans to accomplish. Even when he talked about the economy's improving, he didn't say, I created the jobs. He said, we. So I think it was a very different Donald Trump. I also think it was the best description he has ever given of what Make America Great Again means and what America First means. He's usually tweeted this stuff out, but he's never really articulated it. So.
Thank you for noticing my articulation,
Yes,
KT.
I was so drugged.
You're hired.
It was like all of the boring tweets
you're
that
tired.
I don't send.
You're tired. I mean, hired, fired. But I can't remember. It doesn't matter.
That's an insult to Trump. If you're watching this as a Trump supporter, you should respectfully tweet at KT McFarland and tell her to respect your president more, because she just undermined, frankly, a lot of his best work, which are free form, off the cuff.
Well,
and very much about himself.
Here's the thing. KT McFarland may believe that this was the best speech that Donald Trump has ever given because he didn't repeat the words twice as he read them. He read slowly, almost as if he couldn't read.
That would have been great if he did a whole there's a big section on sex traffickers. Isn't that something?
Yeah.
Because that's a real big problem.
Sex trafficking. It's the worst. Right?
It's the worst.
But
do we remember Hillary Clinton with Jeffrey Epstein? That whole thing. It was terrible.
She was very excited about how humble he was in the speech that was written for him. Looking at a teleprompter. You remember? Does anybody remember how much the Republicans talked about Barack Obama using a teleprompter? I mean, this went on for years. And now they're praising Donald Trump for just being able to read the speech that was given to him. But his humility was all saved up for that speech, because here he is asked a question at the United Nations about Nobel Prize.
Very likely and definitely you will be deserving a Nobel Prize. I'm bad.
I think I'll get a Nobel Prize for a lot of things.
Mr. President,
I think I'm going to get a Nobel Prize for a lot of things if they gave it out fairly, which they don't. They gave it out. Well, they gave one to Obama immediately upon his ascent to the presidency, and he had no idea why he got it. And you know what? That was the only thing I agreed with him on.
Oh my God.
There we go. Where was that man during the speech? But you know what I love?
That was pre-medication.
That was before they drugged me in the bathroom. What I think is amazing though about all of the fake Obama, like there was this Republican obsession with this nonsense. They talked about the teleprompter for years. There was the suit thing when he came out wearing like a tan suit or something, and they tried to make that a thing. But it was perfect because it was like the Republicans definitionally could not talk about his actual scandals, and liberals wouldn't, or centrists or whatever wouldn't hold him accountable for that either. So you had an administration of like bank bailouts and drone strikes and all of this stuff, but because none of that was on the table, they did have to go like, he uses a teleprompter.
Tan suit.
The best one was Obama's hip-hop barbecue fails to create jobs.
That was pretty great.
That was true, actually, though.
Oh, really? Common didn't create any jobs. We created a fire party. Sorry, white people.
Let's go to 469 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? 469. Hello? I hear you. One more chance. Bye. Come from a Skype number, I think it is. Who's this?
Hi, how's it going? This is Matthew from England.
Matthew from England. Matthew, what the heck is going on in your country? I don't understand it. Any of it.
Well, am I allowed to swear?
Yes. If you do it with a British accent and the transcripts can't pick it up, go ahead.
Well, I'm South African. It's a clusterfuck, actually. It's a little bit embarrassing, really. It's the second time I've lived in a country that the premier has been found to be breaking the law by the highest court in the land. And my green card comes through soon, so maybe I'll be 3 for 3.
There you go. Congratulations. Oh, green card from the United States. That's right. Yeah, you certainly bring some luck. So what is was that? Is that what you were calling in to just tell us that you are the harbinger?
Well, yeah, not really. No. I was just calling in basically first to give props to my girl, Greta Thunberg. Unfortunately, I'm a public servant, so I can't be joining in on the climate strikes, but I think she's an embodiment of maybe an energy that was there in young people, but she's also, her personality has amplified that energy. It can't have come soon enough. We need a lot more pressure, basically. As a Tory, who we'd probably disagree with, but he's a very smart politician by the name of Ken Clark said, is on climate change. Sadly, politicians don't lead. They will only follow where the voters go. And so the voters and the public have to put serious pressure on politicians and businesses to just be making these changes.
Yeah, I agree. I think she's been very inspiring to a lot of young people, too. And I think, with something like this, you don't really see the impact of it until you're some distance away in terms of time to see what is inspired by it. But I appreciate the call, and I'm now going to play a clip that gives you a sense of what the right is doing in response to Greta Thunberg. We played the clips of her yesterday chastising the UN, basically saying, like, don't come here and condescend. Don't get all sentimental at how cute it is that a 16-year-old girl is come across the ocean. This is not about, this is not a feel-good movie of the summer. This is about you people doing your job so that I don't have to do this type of thing. And in addition to the right blaming her for anxiety rates in Europe, This is the tack they're going to take here. Michael Knowles, he's really desperately trying to create a name for himself in the Ben Shapiro world of right-wing talk.
Another failed actor, right?
He's another failed
Yes.
actor. I mean, let me put it this way. Like, arguably, I'm a failed actor. I was so much more successful than a Michael Knowles. And when I went into this, I did so thinking I was only going to do it for 6 months. I was still turning down film roles and still writing scripts. And I was in LA shooting a TV show when I got called to do this. I've seen Michael Knowles reel, and he was not a bad actor. He wasn't doing anything. It was all, sort of like home movie type of stuff or small, probably student films. But the guy didn't have the wherewithal, and I think it was probably a smart move on his part. But here he is, desperately trying. I mean, how do you push back on an incredibly articulate, brave 16-year-old who is trying to draw attention to climate change, who's basically, has just told the UN your delusion of perpetual economic growth is just that. How do you push back on this? Well, of course, you do the same thing you do in regards to everyone else that you look down upon as a conservative. Black people, Latino people, women who speak up, they're all being used, right? That is the formulation. In fact, it's also the formulation of white nationalists, right? The Jews, the problem with the Jews is they're race traders, and they are getting the black people to do their bidding. Well, this is part of that. Michael Knowles tries to set the predicate for Greta Thunberg, has no idea what she's doing. She's being manipulated.
Matters because the climate hysteria movement is not about science. If it were about science, it would be led by scientists rather than by politicians and a mentally ill Swedish child who is being exploited by her parents and by the international left. So what you're seeing here is a political movement and a religious movement, and it's fulfilling religious and political goals of the left, but it isn't doing very much for science.
Chris, you had a visceral reaction to that. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, you're a grown man and you're attacking a child. Shame on you. She's trying to do what she thinks is right. And by the way, now relax, skinny boy. I got this. Okay, you're attacking a child. You're a grown man. Have some couth.
I'm not. I'm attacking the left for exploiting a mentally ill child.
Maybe on your podcast, you get away and say whatever you want because nobody's listening. You're on national television. Be a grown-up when you're talking about children. She's trying to save the planet because your president doesn't believe in climate change, and kids need to take to the streets to worry about their future. You are despicable for talking to her about her like that, and you should apologize on national television right now.
I think the international left and her parents who are exploiting a girl with many mental illnesses.
You called her mentally ill. Take it back now.
First off, okay, all right, so we don't need to hear any more about this. So she has Asperger's, which in no way would suggest that her parents have the ability to manipulate her to believe that climate change is a problem. It is, I think it's conceivable that
evidence-based commentary.
Right. Her intrepidness in facing people on the world stage may in some way be a function of her Asperger's that may help her in some way in having that type of guts. But the idea that you would get up and say that she's mentally ill, that's why she cares about climate change and that she's being exploited is it's pretty shocking. Now, of course, we know what happens to scientists who go in the forefront of this. Ask Michael Mann, who's just buried. And I think he just won his lawsuit, actually. But I mean, the idea that now they're saying, well, what about the scientists? And it's all the hysteria. This is what you can track from denial to denying that it's man-made, to, well, they're getting so emotional about it. Michael Knowles is no longer going to be on Fox News. I wonder how long that is going to be, but Fox News announced that they just...
Big loss.
Yeah. That he crossed the one, apparently, standard they have there.
Does he know how many people are living with a mental illness of some kind? Like, it's ableist as shit in addition to everything else.
Of course. He's trying to make it like she has no capacity. It is simply like, how desperate do you have to be to push back on this? And it is really basically the same. They need to come up with this because they need to come up with, like, how is she being manipulated? She's too old. She's shown that she has too much competence to sort of say that in general. It's just like she has no idea what she's doing. She has some type of mental illness. Meanwhile, Fox has said that Michael Knowles is not welcome back on their network. They won't book him again, according to Fox. Now, we'll see how long that lasts. But maybe they should also just keep watching the rest of their network, because Laura Ingraham, who still has a show on there, I don't know how many advertisers she has, she couldn't let it lie either. Now, to be fair to Fox, their president is about to be impeached, or at least to start to go through the impeachment process. They may not want to talk about that. So it's a little bit easier to attack a young woman. That is, I would say, if you could find the Bible to Fox News and boil it down to one commandment as to making it, is always find a young female villain. Here is Laura Ingraham fulfilling the first Fox commandment.
The world is waking up, and change is coming whether you like it or not.
Anyone else find that chilling?
A time of tribulation has come. A test is at hand. The final test.
I can't wait for Stephen King's sequel, Children of the Climate.
There you go. She's comparing Greta Thunberg to Children of the Corn.
Wow. Glass houses, fascist Stepford wife.
Indeed. That's pretty good. I mean, it's all just part of what they need to do to address this. It's pretty stunning. Bernie came out with a new plan. He had two new plans actually released in the past 2 days. One is a plan to eliminate Americans' medical debt. They will negotiate and pay off past due medical bills and collections that credit agencies have reported. They would also ban the collection of medical debts beyond the statute of limitations and instruct the IRS to conduct a review of the billing and collection practices of the nearly 3,000 nonprofit hospitals. So broadly assault medical debt. The other big plan that he dropped was a wealth tax that you'll recall Elizabeth Warren had introduced a wealth tax some time ago. This one is even more dramatic. It would create an annual tax that would apply to households with it. Now, I want everybody to sit down because I don't want you're going to freak out about this, a lot of you. It's going to apply to households. So it's not just an individual. It's a married couple who have this amount together with a net worth above $32 million. Yep. This will affect 180,000 households in total, the top 0.1%. he would create a 1% tax on net worth above 32 million with increasing marginal rates that top out at 8% on net worth over $10 billion. So those people are going to get hit hard. That is, for single filers, the brackets would be halved, meaning the tax would kick in at $16 million. Yeesh. I got to start looking into some places in the Bahamas or something.
I mean, I'm an
Bermuda.
ardent Bernie supporter, but it's disturbing on some level when you look at like the stats that most Americans can't get, $500 together as an example. This is the type of thing that gives us a brand for being disconnected from middle-class concerns.
Here is Stuart Varney, the expert, brought on to Fox and Friends to explain why this is so bad.
Senator Elizabeth Warren has a wealth tax proposal. If you are worth $50 million or more, you would pay a wealth tax of 2% each and every year on your accumulated wealth. Axios reports that Bernie Sanders has an even more aggressive wealth tax. In other words, he would take more than the 2% over 50 million that Elizabeth Warren would take. Either way, they are rotten proposals. Number one, they're a brand new form of taxation, and who needs that? And number two, it assumes that the government will do more good with the money they take off you than those wealthy individuals can do with it themselves, like create jobs, innovate in technology, put their money to work in different kind of ways. It's a rotten idea from top to bottom.
Well, when they sit down on their laptop, they say, wow, that's a populist message. Let's blame the successful people for the struggles I'm feeling, maybe for middle class and working class. They say, I like that idea.
Do you think it would do more good?
Pause it for 1 second. I just want to review. I wish we had the ability to put a quick chyron up, but we could show the 2 points that he makes against these proposals. First one is, who needs that? That's literally, it creates a new tax. Who needs that? That's the first reason why you would not want to do this, because who needs it? And the second one is, do you think that government will do better with this accumulated wealth tax than those who are sitting on this accumulated wealth? Now, definitionally, accumulated wealth is not being invested in creating jobs. It is accumulating.
It's a hoard that they're sitting on.
It is exactly that.
Is that a populist idea that's popping up in your head?
It's where the
your
word
desktop
hoard
over
comes
there?
from.
Exactly. It's definitionally. People create jobs to the extent that they create jobs with their businesses. This is not a corporate tax. This is on individuals. None of that money that these individuals are sitting on create jobs. Now, to be fair, maybe they are spending this money on a McMansion or 10 or an extra 100 or 200 foot boat, but it's not that 2% or 1% above 32 million that they're spending, right? Like the idea that like, oh, I only have $32 million between the two of us, sweetheart. We're going to have to pay another $3 million in taxes. That's going to leave us only with $29 million. So I guess we're not going to go out and spend $22 million on the house that we were going to get, or the boat, or the car.
And they're demonetizing YouTube.
There is no scenario where this is going to stop a wealthy person from buying what they want to buy. The fact of the matter is they can't find enough to buy. But let's let Stuart Varney have one more crack at this.
Their money to work in different kind of ways. It's a rotten idea from top to bottom.
When they sit down on their laptop, they say, wow, that's a populist message. Let's blame the successful people for the struggles I'm feeling, maybe for middle class and working class. They say, I like that idea.
Do you think it would do more good to take money off wealthy people and give it to other people?
That's not the way.
Yeah. Yes. The answer is yes. It would. In fact, it would. There's a tremendous amount of data that shows that it would. I can just tell you, like at first, the concentration of wealth is underfunding our Social Security program. The concentration of wealth is slowing the velocity of money. It is not traveling through the system as much. Not as many people are touching it because you have it all. You have 3 families in this country who have more wealth than the bottom 50% of the people? Of course it would. There's not even any question. In fact, all you can come up with for the reasons why it's no good is who needs that? Under Bernie's plan, this is how much these billionaires would owe this year. The Walton family would owe $14.8 billion. Jeff Bezos, $8.9 billion. Charles Koch, $3.2 billion. Sheldon Adelson, $2.6 billion. Rupert Murdoch, $1.28 billion. Just contemplate, this is a 1%, or I guess on some of these guys, an 8% tax. The idea would be within 15 years, you would basically take out billionaires. You would tax at a rate in which they cannot accumulate this kind of wealth. And so good for Bernie. I don't know if we will see it anytime soon, but the idea, the fact that 2 of the leading candidates are debating how much should we take from billionaires, I like quite a bit.
There's a contrast that kind of points out how, they aren't using this money for anything useful because, as this Yahoo Finance clip points out, it's all stuck into things that aren't very liquid.
That's right. Okay, so here's another example of this. Here we go. Here is they're looking at this on Yahoo and they're trying to figure out how do we talk about this? How can we possibly make it sound sympathetic that someone with over $32 million just parked somewhere is in some way, it's going to be complicated. It's going to be so complicated to do this.
It's not. It's bad for the market, but it's also very early in the primary season. And as is the case in every primary season, it's all about appealing to your base. So the Bernie Sanders, the Elizabeth Warren wing of the party, however defined, is appealing to that base and almost sort of one-upping. I see your 2% wealth tax and raise you up to, I think Bernie's proposal was as high as 8%. Yeah. But the statement he tweeted this morning at, I think, 9:01.
About 8% on over $10 billion worth.
8% on, I'm sorry.
10 billion.
10 billion or more.
Billionaires,
yeah, for couples, I think that is. Yeah.
Couples,
leaving aside the legal challenges to it, the practicality is hard. People who have that much money don't have it in a bank account or in a brokerage account. It's held in illiquid, hard to value assets, be it private companies, be it real estate, be it art for that matter. Valuing those things on an annual basis has all kinds of
because
friction.
it's not.
Pause it. Now, there's a lot of friction in valuing. I mean, because all that art that they're hanging out, like those $20 million paintings that they have in their house, those are creating a lot of jobs because you have to have someone come in and dust it. You have to have someone come in and make sure that the climate is correct in your McMansion so that the canvas does not get too crunchy in your apartment.
Dude, we're talking above McMansion at this point.
Oh,
this isn't even McMansion.
Yeah. Right. No, it's
McMansion is for the low
mansion.
10 million.
But I love the idea that this guy's saying the implication is, when Bernie or Warren get into the general election, they're going to have to soften a little bit to bring in a wider coalition. They'll probably have to drop that wealth tax down to drop it up to it'll be 40 million or above.
The one
or
thing,
billionaires
lawnmower over
Trump
Trump at every single debate. You're out here making a big show. Well, I got a tax. How about that? I mean, it's just I know it will never change because this is it's not empirically based, but it's stunning. Every single poll says socially moderate to even center right, economically center left to populist. That is this wherever the elusive center exists, that's what it is. And these people just still talk as if there's somebody in
There's
Akron.
going to be a lot of people.
Someone in Akron making like $50,000 a year is like, you know what? I'm pretty concerned about this wealth tax because there's really creative people who run the economy, and I sure wouldn't want them to jeopardize my lower middle class job. That
And why don't you
certainly
support the
happens-
arts, huh, Bernie?
That certainly hasn't happened.
That's right.
In the last
Who's
couple of
gonna buy
decades.
all
That's
those,
the more boutique version, right? If you do that, there won't be any more public art in New York.
You're calling from a Skype number, as far as I can tell. This is a 266.
Yeah, is that me?
Yeah. Who's this?
Oh, perfect. Sorry, I'm calling from New Zealand, so there might be a second delay or so.
Well, it sounds pretty good. What's on your mind? Who is this?
Awesome. This is Peter. I was hearing that that Trump UN, was it the Trump UN?
Yep.
He was giving a speech at. They sound very droll and out of it. He
Yep.
sounded like one of his parents was filming him after he got his wisdom teeth taken out.
Yes, exactly.
That's very disconcerting, eh?
Yeah.
I mean, what's the plan after that? I mean, if Pence steps in, are we shattered? Or are we happy? Are we feeling like the election's in the bag, or at what point does this all kind of fall apart?
I will presume that the election is in the bag 45 minutes to an hour after they call it on November, whatever that day is, 7th or 8th, 6th.
I don't mean I don't mean in terms of his mental well-being. I mean, if Trump doesn't make it to the election at that time, I mean, because this is a real back and forth at this point. One day I'm seeing him, he's brisk, he's getting out his normal 5 words, and then the next day, he's sloshing along, barely making it.
Look, people have been thinking that he's going to drop since day one with a heart attack, and I don't. I think it's highly, highly unlikely. Drop, I mean, literally physically.
No, I understand, but I'm saying like even today they put him on some drug cocktail. I'm almost certain.
Yeah.
He was already back to himself in the Nobel Prize section.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, is probably the only reason we don't have like a global war happening right now.
Right. I mean, I look. I don't think this is. I guess it's. I think it's highly unlikely. Yeah, I just don't think that's in reality. It's far more likely, frankly, that he'll have an opportunity to pick a Supreme Court justice than he'll have to have someone stand in for him in the election. It would be my guess. But hopefully, if Trump was to get struck by lightning. And Mike Pence became the president, and Mike Pence ran against that, I would also not be terribly worried about Mike Pence.
I'd prefer to run against Mike Pence than Donald Trump.
Yeah.
For sure.
Particularly if he had no time to do any damage. Go ahead.
A really quick point I also wanted to bring up, the actual reason I was calling was about the Greta setup, and your interview earlier actually kind of led into this quite well. You were talking about liberals in the radio in the early days, and I don't know if you remember Alan Berg. Way back in the day.
Chicago. He was killed by some Nazis.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was kind of the early days as I remember it. I remember my dad kind of talking about those days, when, after the 60s and 70s kind of blew over, being a liberal in the 80s was kind of a frightening experience.
Yep.
And that kind of seeped over into the 90s as well. But, I mean, this has really picked up on social media. I started following Trump, not Trump, but the people that Trump is following online. And man, that is a headache. And this morning, it was just pure vitriol, all at Greta. If you want to go look at those posts of all the people he's following, it's just right down the line of people just making those, mentally ill child comments. If this were my kid, I'd smack him. I'd throw him over the side. Ann Coulter. I forget the name of that
Michael Knowles. Ann Coulter. Ann Coulter congratulated him on his appearance.
Congratulate them. By the way, you have a kid A.
Yeah, I have kid A and kid B.
If your kid ever wants to make their own Ann Coulter, just have them glue some yarn and googly eyes on their elbow.
I will tell them to do that. I appreciate the call.
The woman is angular.
You gotta like both the arts and crafts suggestions and the comments. Calling from a 612 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, this is Bullfrog.
Bullfrog. What's that?
Bullfrog.
Well, Bullfrog. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much. We love your the work you've done.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm always tickled when you guys comment on it.
It's amazing. Let's play a little bit just to remind folks of what we're talking about.
It's an incredible accomplishment.
This and so that we can get here. Go ahead. This, of course, is Bullfrog right here.
Left is best.
All right. So now that we have you on the phone,
I may have a disagreement. Yeah,
okay, pause it. Now that we have you on the phone, how did you? What did it start as? Like, did you first put together the audio, or did you have like a notion in your head? Like, how did it start?
Well, so like I've been listening to you for years and years, and I have all of these memories of different memes and inside jokes bouncing around in my head. And then DJ Danarchy had that Funhouse song come out, and I write music too as a hobby now, but excuse me. Yeah, I just sat down one Friday night and like spent 8 hours or 10 hours going through old clips and episodes and picking out fun phrases and little things, and then kind of grouped them into something that seemed like they made a narrative, and then wrote some music and just kind of formed it into a kind of rhythmic speaking, as you could say.
Yeah. And then you did the animation.
Yeah, I had to teach myself how to do the animation because I had showed a few people the song, and I could see they were kind of confused trying to follow along, and I had this vision in my head of what was going on. And yeah, I basically just used like PowerPoint and iMovie to make an animation for it. And added a bunch of little other inside jokes. Like my favorite little Easter egg in there is when you and Michael are talking about making new moves or whatever, and Michael's drinking Chablis.
Yep.
Which
That's
is
a reach. I remember
a
that.
joke back from like the Occupy Wall Street era.
Yeah.
You were teasing him about being hungover coming in or something, and saying that he drank too much Chablis that night or something.
Yep.
I remember every time I would have a laminated copy of my pay stubs during the Chablis jokes. I was like, really?
The Chablis and the yoga, right?
I was drinking rainwater with 5 roommates.
Wasn't high quality Chablis. $2 Chuck. Oh yeah, no, I've noticed the Chablis all the time. I didn't even think that was I
remember that, Bullfrog. It's every part of this is. I mean, you literally can come up. There's new things that I notice every single time.
Yes, I still see new things that I am amazed by.
Yeah, this crowd never gets tired of art that's about us.
Glad it returns the rewards over and over.
Well, it really is a masterpiece, and it really I honestly I can't thank you enough.
I like all the Mathgate stuff in there because that was a different time.
The Mathgate thing was yes.
Thank you. I clip all of your reactions to it when I'm feeling down. I go back and watch you guys laugh.
No, it's hysterical. I also really, I mean, it's less. I guess it's less prominent, but I thought the Dave Rubin video you did as well was also masterful work.
No, can you not hear Michael? Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say I also think the Dave Rubin video you did was masterful.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. That was a fun little
that one,
thing
right?
while I was teaching myself how to animate.
So that's the one that begins with Damore and Rubin. And then it just left his best debate, Sam Seder.
Hey, Dave, this is a very brave move on your part.
Oh, yeah.
Have you heard about the SJW nonsense on the...
Dave Rubin is going to absolutely need to be
exposed.
Look, I encourage all of you to go fan trolling.
Fan trolling. I love that part.
Start kicking in. There was a video, and then there was like 14 videos. So
Oh my
a lot
God.
of people
Woolsey comes in.
made mixes of this.
Our friends, creative, awesome people on YouTube. It's basically everybody.
We got a ton. And here's another. Debate Sam Seder. Debate Sam Seder.
Why don't you just run to your safe space, Dave?
Debate Sam Seder. Debate Sam Seder.
I love, wait. I mean, I don't think it's a few more seconds. I'm being indulgent here, but there's the James Woolsey, David Cameron, like mashed up. Can't even describe it. It's
so
That's a random shot of me with Skrillex there, too. That's a deep cut.
Yeah, those just.
the Jesus
Google
image on
images.
that one is a
I
lot.
don't know, found it pretty easily, actually.
Skrillex does have a similar energy, I gotta say, in terms of his persecution complex.
Gotta say, just can't thank you enough. Really, the hours of enjoyment that we have gotten from this, days, has been.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
I'm
and-
so glad. I'm so glad to hear that. That's great.
And thanks for not
Oh,
forgetting
and,
me, Matt, and even the elusive Brendan.
Yeah. Also, just on top of everything else, as much as I like to watch you squirm, I'm one of those they people. So, in case you're worried about pronouns.
One of the they people?
Oh, got it.
They, them.
Yeah, I'm a they person.
Thank
How
you.
can we possibly use that word?
I wouldn't. I don't know how to address you.
That is a real problem.
It's literally not a word.
Never
What's this
in
they?
history, except for the times that I've used it on Twitter, has someone referred to a person as they.
Someone pointed out that the great thing with Ben Shapiro is that there is literally always a tweet. So like there was
we did that yesterday.
Well,
We
no,
did-
about David Koch.
Oh, no.
There was one where he was like, "You ghouls, David Koch supported marriage equality," which was like not really the point of why those of us were celebrating David Koch's death. And then of course there was and you know what's funny is honestly there is a part of me that I don't take offense to that. I think some people want to try to maintain some standards in general, and I don't have a problem with that. But Ben Shapiro immediately, of course, there's screenshots of like essentially like basically I'm happy Howard Zinn is dead. Hopefully like the clock is like close on Chomsky too. It's like, all right, buddy. Just every single time with that kid.
It's horrible.
What a little bastard.
Well, Bullprog, again, thank you so much. I'm so glad you called in.
They are an asshole, Ben Shapiro.
I really am so excited to know how you you conceived of that, at least. I mean, that process is fascinating to me, that it was just basically the way that you grouped that together.
Also inspirational, kids. If you want to learn technical skills, you can do it.
Yes.
You can be an autodidact.
Well, thanks so much.
I actually really
thank you,
quick,
Bullprog.
Bullprog, and for all creative people out there, Kyle Kolinsky the other day shared with me a 2014 Dave Rubin on TYT defending the Israeli bombardment of Gaza. I'll just say that clip's one of the funniest things I've seen in quite some time. Like if the content was not so disturbing, watch Dave basically clearly talking about the only subject area that he actually cares about, which is defending Israel, and just being completely. There's one part where he's just like, I know we don't trust the government and stuff, but maybe this is one time where we do trust them, that Hamas started it. And he just looks like such a dope.
All right, appreciate the call.
Better with the beard, Dave. I'll give him that. Definitely an upgrade.
Thanks.
He's just got this big vacant look on his face, and he's just literally just like, yeah, no, I know that we should like bomb schools and stuff, but I mean, maybe, the Israelis are trying. It's actually beautiful because it's just like the libertarian stuff. It's just like the distilled essence of what everybody says when they defend Israel, just pared down to raw stupidity.
Yeah,
right.
without any of the
No
sort of
flourish.
like accoutrements. Calling from a 715 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, I'm Drake from Wisconsin.
Drake?
Yeah, Drake from Wisconsin.
What's on your mind, Drake?
So, on the topic of Bernie and Warren, I'm kind of thinking about if Warren does get the bid, what are your guys' thoughts on Bernie as a vice? I think he could make a big impact on the ground, and he can do a lot of groundwork as vice president.
I mean, I find it hard to believe that either one of them would pick each other for vice president. I mean, I guess it's conceivable that that Bernie would pick Warren for vice president, but I think, first of all, I really think that you need to have a person of color on the ticket. I just think that, like, there is, I mean, just in my interview with Bernie, I said this yesterday, that his movement, and I think his involvement in his movement, is going to exist regardless of what happens with this presidential outcome. I would imagine that if Bernie wanted Elizabeth Warren in the administration, that she would have the pick of where she wanted to go on some level. But I think I think you need some youth on the ticket, and I think you need some a black person, a brown person.
Well, Warren is a Native American.
Well,
and now Pocahontas, my running mate.
I mean, I think she probably does have some Native American blood in her, but I don't think that's
probably about as much of like I don't even know, Serbian blood as you have. I think that
I actually
you
could
probably have
have
2%. Yeah, well, I think most of us have 2% of most everything. I think that I don't know. I do think in general it's just honestly way too early to ask questions like that. And the only time it really becomes relevant is if there was some type of convention, literal formal alliance scenario, and that there was an agreement. And then that would just be a question of who wanted it and who was in the lead, right? I mean, right. Yeah. But in general, it seems to me that you would pick somebody both from what Sam was saying, and maybe also, frankly, somebody younger, if that's possible as well, like somebody not in their 70s,
right?
In both cases.
Appreciate the call. Got a lot of people who've been hanging on for a while. Calling from a 308 area code. Comes up.
Hey, Sam, can you hear me?
I can. Is this Kowalski?
Hey, this is Kowalski.
Kowalski?
Hey, you remembered.
In Nebraska. What's on your mind?
Yeah. Oh, just wanted to call in because on YouTube I've been running into this advertisement that talks about 55% of all rural healthcare providers would get shut down if there was a Medicare for All or one of these other government plans. I looked into it a little bit more. It's from the Partnership for America's Healthcare Future, which is just a lobbying group, I guess, from health insurance companies and pharmaceutical companies that want to prevent the expansion of government health care. Looking into their source a little bit more, it's just a straight up lie. It's not even a half truth. It's just a lie. I'm not really sure how that's even legal, but it's been making the rounds, I guess, around here and in Kansas and in Iowa. So there's something for your viewers to keep a lookout for.
Yeah, not only is that not the case, I mean, look, there has to be Medicare for All is not going to solve the problem of like hospital concentration and the hedge funds that are taking over these hospitals and the buying distressed hospitals and closing them down or selling them for real estate or whatever. All of these things, there's going to have to be other measures that take on the hospital industry and reform it. And if it with Medicare for All or in the absence of Medicare for All, there's going to be a real problem with rural hospitals, I think, because it's just too profitable.
I just see that they'll end up doing direct subsidies. I mean, that's how the Aussies do it. I don't see why we wouldn't use it. It works for them. I know a few people from Australia. It works. So just one of those things people need to keep in mind. Like, this isn't something that people aren't on the lookout for. It's just something that they're using in Iowa, I think. If anything, this probably helps Biden more than anyone else.
What's that?
But Biden's not really, the Medicare for all kind of guy. He's
I see what you're saying. Well, it came out that Biden's campaign had contracted a third way organization to come up with those type of things. In fact, I'm not even convinced that those talking points didn't come probably from, some enterprise associated with them. So, yes, that's why it helps Biden, probably because on some level the campaign paid for it. But or vice versa. Appreciate the call.
There we go.
All right, I got time here for people who've been holding on the phone for over an hour. Calling from a 770 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, Sam. This is Kyle from Atlanta.
Kyle from Atlanta. What's on your mind?
Hey, the other week I was having a conversation. I play some D&D with some buddies every week, and we were staying late, three of us, and it was like the perfect control group for like a progressive, a liberal, and like a Reagan-esque libertarian.
Yeah.
As I thought of you with, you made me think of you with a lot of the talking points that he used. I find it interesting. It seemed like the liberal in the room on policy was sort of closer, to a lot of what I was saying. But he felt the need to kind of beat up on me more when I was talking versus the libertarian. And I'm curious your perspective as to why it is that there are certain liberals that are just so resistant to the sort of, I guess, what they view as far left ideas, that they just, they push them away, and give the bullet to the progressive in the room, where the libertarian is, spreading falsehood and bullshit.
I think maybe it's because I don't know. I think it's a personality trait. I think it's like because it's
was my question clear, Sam?
The question is, why do liberals or centrists tend to attack the left more? Is that it?
Yes, effectively. Because that's obviously an anecdotal example, but it's not the only it's not the only experience I've had like that.
Well, I think
it seems to be.
Sorry,
go ahead.
I think it could come from a bunch of things. I think one, there's a perception that it is the existence of someone to your left can sometimes make you feel like the integrity of your position is being questioned, right? Like that the emotional impulses that you have to that formulate your politics. Someone wants to sort of someone who is arguing from the same emotional impulses, but wants to go further in terms of implementation in some respects. It may make you feel insecure about your position. I think some people also sort of perceive it to be that like it's frustrating when you and I agree on sort of similar outcomes, but what you are suggesting is counterproductive. I think that probably goes both ways.
Can I jump in?
This is true across the entire left of center spectrum too, from, centrist liberals to even people who identify as democratic socialists saying, I'm the real left and everyone to the left of me is just crazy or a wrecker or some kind of like insane ultra leftist.
Right.
I would watch.
And they're also
Aaron Bastani did I just want to plug it real quick because he did like a 10-minute video that spoke directly to this dynamic, and it reflects some of what Sam said, but it's elaborated, and I think it's a big part of wanting to simultaneously think that they hold both the moral and practical positions. And you're both undermining their case because the truth is, as an example, you can do way more for poverty and inequality than they're allowing. And also, and again, I'm assuming this is a, relatively limited conversation, but like single payer is extraordinarily practical. So they get kind of touchy from both angles. Anyway, check out the Bastani
and the
thing.
interesting kind of thing there, Michael, was he seemed to even agree with me on a lot of the policy. Seemed to be sort of even less leaning for a liberal.
Your friend just sucks,
my
though. Get a
experience.
new D&D buddy. He sounds like a cuck.
What's that?
Your friend sounds like a cuck.
What did that person articulate? Was
I mean, for what specifically?
Well, I don't know. I mean, you say that he's taking swipes. I mean, what in particular?
Well, what was really interesting is he gave me I won't use his last name, but he used his last name and said it's the blah blah plan. And it really what it would accomplish if implemented was really a lot of what the sort of progressive left advocates for. And I was left it was very frustrating. I was left at one point to just sort of say, I think that the only difference between us is that what I'm advocating for is actually policy that is, being discussed.
Your friend is a pedantic megacock.
I'm trying to figure. Yeah, go ahead.
Nancy Pelosi announced impeachment proceedings.
Oh, she did. Okay. All right. So wait. So what? So I'm now I'm confused. So you both agree on outcomes, and they just resent the fact that the policy.
It seemed resent the fact that I know it. I don't think so. I frankly I don't know that we got far enough to to even get to what his true objections were, because it seemed.
Well, how did the objections come out? Like what? I mean, how did you know that he had objections?
Well, it wasn't. He didn't vocalize them much on the substance as much as he just did. Try to sort of attack me on philosophical grounds. And some of the misunderstanding that you're articulating now is sort of what I felt speaking with them.
It sounds like maybe your buddy has a little bit of an ego issue. I mean, sometimes it can just be personal. Maybe you're a jerk.
Well,
how old is he? How old are you?
He's an older guy. He's a teacher that's I think he's getting to 40, probably pretty close.
Right,
I'm almost 27.
Yeah. Well, okay. I mean, I think like a 27-year-old coming in to tell a 40-year-old teacher, who the hell do you think you are, buddy? I think there could have been some of that going on. But endeavor to persevere, as they say. And I got news for you. You were the final call on the program today.
I'm honored.
There you go. I appreciate the call. Bye-bye.
Hey, so Sam, real quick, with peace and love, I love this segment way more when you do it where you actually speak with people for an extended period of time as opposed to the 30-second calls. I think you guys are best when you're on substance, and it's just best. You're able to.
Yeah, I don't like to do that regularly, but sometimes I feel bad when people have hold on and just give them a chance for 30 seconds. But I hear that. Appreciate the call. Bye-bye. All right, folks, that's all the time we have for today's program. However, good news, we'll be back tomorrow. Tomorrow is Wednesday. Usually we do news on Wednesdays. We will talk news. We'll have David Dayen on, so we'll be able to talk news as well as something that's highly relevant. American Prospect has an amazing outline of what actually could be done, not literally in the first day, but sort of on the first day, regardless of what the legislative situation is. So this is even that much more relevant for people who like a Warren or a Sanders presidency. and may not have a compliant Congress. All right, folks, see you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bar, but finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I guess somewhere the choice was made for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive between the 101 and the 5. Do you know how far the detour takes you? Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. The months drifted into years while I shifted in and out of gear, waiting for my moment to happen. I don't know how much longer I can stay in, or how much more I got to pay to play in. I know somehow the lights got graded somewhere before the credits faded.